And it's a real honor to be here today. It's wonderful to see all these people show up and support this great event celebrating Pennsylvania labor history. I've already seen so many friends I didn't expect to see. But yeah, thanks so much for coming, and I'm glad I can share some songs with you. Traveling down this cold town road, listen to my rubber tires whine. Goodbye to Buckeye, white sycamore, I'm leaving you behind. And I've been a coal miner all my life, laying down track in the hole. Got a back like an ironwood, warped by the wind, and blood veins as blue as a coal. Blood veins as blue as a coal. Somebody said, that's a strange tattoo you have on the side of your head. I said, that's the blueprint left by the cold. A little more and I'd be dead. But I love the rumble, and I love the dark, and I love the cool of the sleigh. But this traveling around looking for a job, it's traveling and looking I hate. Traveling and looking I hate. I stood in line for the union, and I fought against the company. I stood for the UMWA. Now who's gonna stand by me? 'Cause I got no job and I got no pay. Hey, I just got a weary soul, and this blue tattoo on the side of my face, left by the number 9 coal. Left by the number 9 coal. Someday, when I'm dead and gone to heaven, the land of my dreams, I won't have to worry on losing my job to hard times and big machines. And I ain't gonna pay my money away on dues and hospital plans. I'm gonna pick coal where the blue heavens roll, and I'll sing with an angel band. I'll sing with an angel band. Thank you very much. Billy Ed Wheeler song. I'm going to play a song that it was on a record that I put out in 2007 called The Unbroken Circle, Songs of the West Virginia Coal Fields. This particular song, though, was inspired by the writings of Stephen Crane, who visited the anthracite mines in Pennsylvania and wrote about the Breaker Boys. Back then, in the breaker, the coal process, when they processed it, it was all done by hand at the hands of children, but there were always a few old men sitting next to those children. We talk about old coal miners 100 years ago. You're talking about men 15 years younger than I am now. In their early 40s, their bodies were so racked from this industry. So if you could go back 100 years and peek into the screen room of the breaker and see one of these young boys sitting next to one of these old coal miners, old before his time, it would kind of be like looking at a snapshot of the normal life cycle at that time of the American coal miner. Well, I work in the breaker and I'm just 9. Told them I was 12, no one asked if I was lying. Picking rock till my nails worn down to the quick. I get 65 cents for a 10-hour shift. Sitting in the screen room digging for slate. It's hot when it's summer, and it's cold when it ain't. And I look down from the mountain down to the tracks. Like a snake long and black. 2 tall spires through the low-hanging clouds. It's all I can see of my dirty, cold town. In a few more years, I'll work the door. Then I'll walk that mine a mile or more. Pick, shovel, lamp, sledge, dynamite, drill. 5 blasts a day, empty cars to fill. 45 years, 45 gone. It's back to the breaker, if I live that long. And I look down from the mountain down to the tracks. Coal train crawls like a snake long and black. 2 tall spires through the low-hanging clouds. It's all I can see of my dirty, cold town. Thank you. In this great labor history that we have, particularly the mining industry, we have a long history of children working in the mines. But I also try to write songs to celebrate the women in the labor movement, and particularly in the mines. And the folks at the Battle of Homestead Foundation, particularly my friend Rosemary Trump, asked me several years back to perform at a commemoration for the 100-year anniversary of the assassination of Fanny Sellens, who was a great organizer and a great caregiver, and she was shot by gun thugs, and her murder spurred, it was the catalyst, or at least helped to galvanize, I should say, the great steel strike of 1919. So when Rosemary asked me to play, I thought, well, if I'm going to play a benefit for Fanny Sellens, I'm going to write a song about Fanny Sellens. From Pueblo, Colorado, Chicago, Illinois, and Wheeling, West Virginia, Lackawanna, Johnstown, PA, Cleveland, and Youngstown, Ohio. The steel strike of 19, a month before set. By September, it was strong, it was sound. And her blood-soaked picture in their union halls. Fanny Sellens, dead on the ground. Gave food to the starving, clothes to the babes, brought children into this hard world of labor and capital, poisoned by greed, seeking only to comfort the many. But the Steel Trust gunmen fired on the line as the miners' children she gathered round. Blood-soaked picture in their union halls. Fanny Sellens, dead on the ground. An angel of mercy, a guardian dear, a battle for freedom and love committed her here, committed her here. The day, forget not the fight, forget not the martyr who's fallen, forget not the Union, the AFL, or the UMWA, forget not the bosses, the company thugs, or the reasons they gunned Fanny down. Her blood-soaked picture in your union hall. Fanny Sellens, dead on the ground. Thank you. And of course, one of my favorite historical figures in American history was perhaps our greatest organizer, Mother Mary Jones, who called the miners her boys. I think Paint Creek is in Kanawha County. It's just south of the, it may not be, but it's just south of the state capital of Charleston. There, the miners went on strike, and they remained on strike. I believe it began in 1911, I think. But anyway, they stayed on strike for 15 months, sustaining themselves only with the help of the Union, who fed them, who gave them rifles to protect themselves from the sniper fire that they were enduring and the acts of harassment, and with the moral support of Mother Jones, who lived in those tents with them. You know, she never preached anything that she wouldn't do herself. And, you know, of course, Mother Jones' most famous quote is, "Pray for the dead, but fight like hell for the living." But my favorite Mother Jones quote is, "When I die, I shall tell God about West Virginia." Because the conditions were so deplorable there, and the opposition so fierce. The opposition reached ahead in Holly Grove campground, or the camping site there, the miners who were living in tents on Paint Creek, when the co-operator, some of his men, of course the sheriff and deputy were involved as well, and they bore holes in the side of a boxcar for their rifles and for a machine gun, and just opened fire, steamed through the camp in the middle of the night and opened fire on the striking miners and their families after they had been disarmed by the National Guard. And only 2 casualties, much to the dismay of the deputy sheriff, who was put on trial for this. Nobody was convicted, but they were prosecuted. But the deputy sheriff sat on the witness stand and admitted to saying, "Let's go back and give those boys another round," unhappy that they didn't inflict more casualties. And of course, in 1912, Teddy Roosevelt was running on a third-party ticket, the Bull Moose Party. So the co-operators and the co-operator and the sheriff and their men, they thought it would be clever to name their train. They called it the Bull Moose Special. Old Mother Jones with her snow-white hair, lightning in her fiery blue eyes. A miner's angel, she come clear across the sea to help us to organize. She was cussing and swearing, but harsh words alone couldn't break that company's hold. So they sent us our guns in 1912 when the Union started to fold. We camped in that holler on the banks of Paint Creek, all through the 15th month strike. We fought for our wages, we fought for our lives, a river between wrong and right. Then old Governor Will declared martial law. He sent his troops down here to disarm. So out of cold dead hands, our rifles they fell at the feet of our National Guard. And then the Bull Moose Special on hot rails to hell. Through the cold night she come rolling down. Beside a co-operator, the sheriff's men opened fire. Let's give those boys another round. She came quiet and fast. She was shiny and black, one side poured out with holes. And out of the darkness She steamed through our camp, her boiler burning our coal. Bull moose special on hot rails to hell. Through the cold night she come rolling down. Beside a coal operator, the sheriff's men open fire. Let's give those boys another round. Let's give those boys another round. Thank you very much. Maybe I'll change directions here a little bit to more recent history. I began writing songs specifically for the United Mine Workers in 2012 when they were in the midst of their Fairness at Patriot campaign. The quick rundown of what that situation was: we had 18,000 union coal miners who had been employed by Peabody Coal and Arch Coal to some extent, mostly Peabody. Peabody created another company, and they made it look as if it was a third-party buyout. A third party had come in and bought their mines, but it was all done behind their boardroom doors. And they created this new company called Patriot Coal, and the first thing they did was they took 18,000 retirees and lumped them into the new company. Now, I'm a folk singer, so I don't know the first thing about business, but I know that if I'm going to start a business, I don't want to start it with 18,000 people who can no longer work. And so that was the first big red flag. Of course, you know, Peabody or Patriot did show a profit for a few years, and then in 2011 or 2012 thereabouts, Patriot Coal did exactly what it was created and designed to do, to go bankrupt, thereby robbing those 18,000 of their pensions and their health care, most importantly their health care. So anyway, I was asked to perform in St. Louis in the shadow of the Peabody building at my first rally, and I went out there with somewhat, selfish or self-centered motives. I'm going to be going out. I knew it was a good cause, obviously, but I thought, how cool is this? I'm going to be with 3,000 coal miners and their families in downtown St. Louis in the shadow of the Peabody building. And all of that went out the window when the buses started to arrive, and I saw these retirees and their families who had spent sometimes up to 15 hours on those buses to get there with their oxygen tanks and their walkers. And their cause seeped into my soul right then and there. And I went home mad as hell, and this was the first song that I wrote for the campaign specifically. Did you work in the mine since you were young and strong? Did you work for that company your whole life long? Did you give them all the best years you had to live to provide for your family, or what they promised they'd give? Are you asking for something that you haven't earned? If you ain't with the union, then buddy, you haven't learned. 'Cause years come and go, but the story's the same. A good man's forgotten, and greed is to blame. Promises made, promises broken, but we'll be there where they run, we'll be there when they hide. A promise was made, and this union has spoken. stand true. One man alone, there's not a lot he can do. So in the union we stand, and in the union we're strong. With the union I'll stay, 'cause I know right from wrong. Promises made, promises broken, but we'll be there where they run, we'll be there when they hide. A promise was made, and the union has spoken. Peabody promised, Peabody lied. Peabody promised, Peabody lied. Thank you. Still seeing more friends of, or more faces of friends here. It's good to see everybody. Those 18,000, they have their health care today and their pensions, thanks to the ongoing efforts of the union. That particular campaign ended in a settlement of $490 million that Peabody gave to the union to continue the health care of the 18,000 until the Keep the Promise campaign was successful in 2019 of getting the federal government to guarantee and live up to the promise made in 1946. I think Charlie might be able to help me. I think it was the Krug-Lewis Act, I believe. And they have their health care and their pensions today because of that. So after the settlement with Peabody, they asked me to write what would become my favorite song to write for the campaign because it was a victory song. From West Virginia and Kentucky, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Indiana, Tennessee, we gathered by that great riverside. We stood in solidarity. And beyond the shadow of a corporate building with its steel and shining glass, we found an open sky over this land of the free and a dream within our grasp. Just working class heroes who came to remind them it's we who pay the freight. We bear the hard times, we shoulder the strain, and we're charged by the weight. But wherever two or three have gathered in his name, that's where justice will be. And so it is. We sought a higher court. We received an answer to our plea. So here's to every hard-working soul and the promise that brought us here. I believe justice would carry the day one day. Now it's here. I still believe it's true. We might all have to live to fight another day. And if so, we'll find strength, power, and justice in the UMWA. With its brothers and its sisters, who together in the unions, they'll forever stand till each struggle is won and there's justice for the worker in every land. So here's to every hard-working soul and the promise that brought us here. I believe justice would carry the day one day. Now it's here. So here's to every hard-working soul and the promise that brought us here. Hey, I believe justice would carry the day one day. Now it's here. Thank you very much. You can correct me on time if I need to. I think maybe two more songs. That'd be good. Coal miners of West Virginia who played such a large part in the labor movement in the early 20th century, and of course West Virginia.
Have him wave his hand.
Lou, wave your hand. There's Lou. He's got his Mine Wars Museum shirt on, and they had a campaign called Courage in the Hollers that resulted in a monument to the miners who participated in the largest labor uprising in American history, the Battle of Blair Mountain. To have a living, standing monument there is two of them actually, where the miners set out and close to where the front lines were at the base of Blair Mountain, one in Marmette, one in Clothier, West Virginia. But to have a monument there is quite an amazing feat, considering that I was educated in the state of West Virginia for 16 years and knew nothing about the Battle of Blair Mountain until I was in my 30s. It's a history that's been suppressed. If you find any of my old West Virginia history books, you can just open the cover and right on the first page it'll say published by Arch Cole. So yeah, congratulations to them, and one of my greatest honors was to be able to share this song at the unveiling of the monument in Clothier. I am a union miner, and I'll work all night and day. I am a union miner, and I'll mine your coal for a union wage. In 17, I left my home for this country's flag. I fought the war. By 21 in my hometown, hey, I weren't welcome in the Legion Hall no more, because I am a union miner, and I'll mine your coal for a union wage. For that wage, I'll lay my life when I march down from Marmette, armed with my Colt and Winchester, a red bandana tied about my neck. I am miner, and I'll mine your coal for a union wage. 10,000 strong, I'll make my stand. My union brothers, all there with me. We ain't coming home till Sheriff Chafin is hanging from a sour apple tree. I am a union miner, and I'll work all night and day. I am a union miner, I'll mine your coal for union wage. I'll mine your coal for union wage. Own songs with you, and I'd like to share, maybe we could sing along together if you'd like. Share a song by my favorite American musician and artist, Woody Guthrie. It's just kind of a fun song. It also has my favorite Woody Guthrie verse of all time in it. And some of you may remember another recording of this, but this was Woody's original. I've sung this song, but I'll sing it again. Of the place that I lived on the wild windy plains, in the month called April, county called Gray. Here's what all of the people there say: so long, it's been good to know you. So long, it's been good to know you. So long, it's been good to know you. This dusty old dust is getting my home, and I've gotta be drifting along. So if your version was different, that's the original. This dusty old dust is getting my home. Well, the dust storm hit. Yeah, it hit like thunder. It dusted us over, and it covered us under. It blocked out the traffic, it blocked out the sun, and straight for home all the people did run, singing so long, it's been good to know you. So long, it's been good to know you. So long, it's been good to know you. This dusty old dust is getting my home, and I've gotta be drifting along. Well, sweethearts sat in the dark and they sparked. They hugged and they kissed in that dusty old dark. They sighed, they cried, they hugged and they kissed. But instead of marriage, they spoke just like this: honey, so long, it's been good to know you. So long, it's been good to know you. So long, it's been good to know you. This dusty old dust is getting my home, and I've gotta be drifting along. Well, the telephone rang. Yeah, it rang off the wall. And that was the preacher. He was making his call. He said, kind friend, this might be the end, but you've got your last chance at salvation from sin. And here's my favorite verse. Well, the churches was jammed, and the churches was packed, and that dusty old dust storm would blow so black, the preacher could not read a word of his text, so he folded his specs, took up a collection, said, so long, it's been good to know you, so long, it's been good to know you, so long, it's been good to know you, this dusty old dust is getting my home, and I've gotta be drifting along. One more time, nice and loud. So long, it's been good to know you. So long, it's been good to know you. So long, it's been good to know you. This dusty old dust is getting my home, and I've gotta be drifting along.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks. Have a wonderful day. And thank you to all of you who put this together and keep the labor history of this country alive. Thanks.
Let me say, welcome. Is that enough?
You can say more now.
I'm really happy not only that you're all here, this is a great group, but I'm happy to be here myself. I haven't been in this area for a long time except through the autobiography of a miner about whom I've read and whose stuff I've read. Unlike just about every political candidate in Pennsylvania, I do not have a grandfather who was a miner. Sad to say. My grandfather, after whom I was named, was an automobile worker and took part in the great 1934 strike in Toledo that set up the Flint sit-down strike a little later, and so on. They also named me after him. But that's okay, right? He was suspected, as an auto worker, he was suspected of being a communist. Yeah. Some days everybody is, I think, who's been around this stuff long enough. But anyway, welcome and have a good time. And we will mix after, when we can, and otherwise we'll listen to each other.
Thank you. The next person, this is John Harris, the president of the Battle of the Homestead Foundation. And John, say a few words.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everybody. What a pleasure to be here. And we beat the big winds coming out here, and hopefully those winds will propel us when we're through to take what we learned and take the good vibes that we've developed through meeting together and talking about labor history and people's history. Those big winds will propel us a bit to work a little harder when we go back and talk to our neighbors and our relatives and go about the business of recreating the history that we want to see, in our communities, in our societies. And I want to say I'm really happy to be in this area. My dad grew up on a farm in Marion Center, Indiana County. I've traveled around this area a lot when I worked for SEIU, knocking on doors up on the hills and different places for nursing home workers and organizing and representing nursing home workers. And I love the area here. I wish sometimes that there wasn't quite as much mines that have been abandoned and streams that have been left to run with acid. But you know what? We got an opportunity now to change a lot of that. And hopefully we'll be able to use some of this federal money and really put people back to work. So the Battle of Homestead Foundation was founded somewhere around the anniversary of the historic Battle of Homestead, which of course happened in 1892. And about 100 years after that, in the Pittsburgh area, a number of workers, union people, academics, artists, community activists got together and said, let's look back at that Battle of Homestead Foundation and let's talk about it and talk about what it means for us today. And out of that came a bunch of really important historical resources, and we're really pleased to be able to have a number of the founders of the Battle of Homestead, or people at that time who worked to recreate or to create the organization here. Steffi Domike is one of them here. Steffi and Charles McAllister and others. Howard, you were around perhaps a little later, but not too much later. But then there's those that have passed away that helped our organization develop. So I want to say that the Battle of Homestead Foundation is very interested in education about labor, education about our communities, and honoring a new story or a different story that we call a people's history. And that is, when the history books are open, yeah, it's okay, we can read about the people that made a lot of money and developed industry and maybe did some good things, because when they died they had billions they didn't know what to do with, and they gave them away that we can look at art or whatever. But a lot of times the history is not talking about what happened to our great-grandfathers and grandfathers and grandmothers, how we made a living and how we fought to be able to make a living, and how we fought to be able to have safe conditions at work. And we want to tell those stories, and we want to tell them because our children are facing as uncertain a future as our great-grandfathers did. They're looking at a whole new way in which people are making money in our society today. And we're looking at a breakdown, really, in a lot of the things that we thought we had accomplished. We thought we had been able to build a middle class, and now we're seeing that eroding. So that's what we're about, and we're so pleased to be able to come here today. I hope, Lou, you didn't mind the little lecture that I gave. And we welcome you all. If you'd like to join us, we are based in the Pittsburgh, Western Pennsylvania area, but a lot of our activities and programs we still do online. And we'd love to build ties with you and your organization and have the work that you're doing in your communities inform the work that we're doing in our communities. So thank you very much for coming, and look forward to a really good presentation today.
Well, in case anybody here doesn't know who I am, my name is Nick Molnar. Yeah, that's true, Nick Molnar. I'm not lying to you, bro. I have warned Jim and John and the executive board that they should never allow me to have a microphone in my hand. But you guys are going to have to listen to me, and you're going to pay the consequences for it. So with that, I'd like to welcome you to Windber, and I'm also going to put some folks here to work. And I mentioned to Larry Blaylock, seeing as how he didn't sit down when I asked him to come up here and help me out here a little bit. Would you hold this up so everybody can see it? The best easel in ground. This is a blow-up of the map that was passed around to you folks that Melanie Arcangelo passed. What that is a representation of Windber. If you look at the center of the map, it says urban center. That means right across the railroad tracks here, that was the urban center. That's where the Arcadia Theater is at. That's where the major company store was at that supplied all the communities around. And each one of these little spots here, except for 32 and 34, were active mines in the 1920s. These two had been mined out. The rest of these that have these little dots with the hash marks on it, those were actually communities. They didn't call them by name or anything like that. They gave them a number. So when you talk about Windber, and each one of these little communities around are actually the mines and the mining communities, and there were hundreds of families that lived in each one of those communities. 1897, by the coal barons Edward Julius Berwin, Charles Berwin, and Congressman Ellison White. Things haven't changed much today. You still have congressmen getting involved in private corporations. In 1922, there were 8,000 people lived in Windber proper. And like I said, in those little communities, those little mines outside of there were several hundred families living in each one of those sites. When the strike happened, the company itself started out as a steamship company in New York City. They controlled all the whole port in New York City. They also supplied coal to all the ships that were coming in and out of New York City harbor. And they also supplied coal to the Navy. And that was just what came out of this area. On Good Friday of 1922, the miners voted and went on strike in this community, in these communities around here. There were several thousand. I mean, you see pictures. I believe that John Kashute has some pictures of the coal camp outside of town, because what happened was, after a while, the company threw all the people out of their company houses, and the company owned all the houses around. Matter of fact, not only did they own all the houses, they built all this whole community here on because they had a brickworks and all kinds of ancillary businesses, a construction company, a brickworks, plumbers, the whole 9 yards, and they basically control and still do control this community fairly rigidly. But when the strike happened, they decided to throw, the action of the company was to throw everybody out of the houses. And I don't mean they just told them to get out. They literally threw their clothing, their bedding, all their food, everything out into the street, out into the mud. There was really no streets. And they starved them to death, basically what they did. Those families that didn't have relatives that lived outside of this area, some of them lived in tent colonies for 12 to 16 months outside of town on private property. And United Mine Workers District 2 supplied them with food and whatever they needed, but basically what it did is it almost bankrupted District 2. And I want to read what John Zarachak, who gave a presentation to the International IUP quite a few years ago. He's passed away now, and this is what his thoughts were on the strike. So after we came into here, we finally, after all these strikes, 1927 and through 1933, and finally, warmly, he said, the dark clouds disappeared. Oh, the miners of Windber, we got our sympathetic president, and that got in there. Yes, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, they got that law, the National Labor Relations Act passed, where you can organize. You're allowed to organize if you want to organize. I'm telling you that the law was passed, and the union come in. The United Mine Workers was short of funds and money, so they borrowed $500,000 from the AFL and put men out in the field for expenses to go out and talk to these miners. They brought cards for us to sign, and the miners signed up, all who wanted the union. I'm telling you, them cars went fast. Everybody was signing up. That's 1933, when they knew that they had finally safe. It could be done. We finally got our first union meeting at the Slovac Brick Hall. Remember that phrase, Slovac Brick Hall. And after a couple of meetings in there in July of 1933, we received our charter, and Berwyn White finally recognized the union. Well, that first strike was lost, but in 1933 we got people back in the union. That was 10 years later, so they suffered for 10 years, but the strike itself lasted for 16 months. When they said the Slovac Brick Hall, it kind of made me stop and think, because I started asking the president of the club here about the history of this building. And this was the Slovac Brick Hall. That's what the people across the street called it, on the other side of the track, so to speak, which is literally on the other side of the track. Or it was or the hunky insurance company. They had an insurance company because there was no such thing as workers' comp at the time. So the pennies and the nickels and dimes that the workers could save, they put into their Slovak insurance company, so that in case their husband or child or somebody got hurt or injured, they at least had some money to fall back on. Well, the name of the insurance company is called the Zidak Hall, and in Slovak, what that means is unity. So every time they talked about the Slovak Hall or the Hunky Hall or whatever, they were talking about this building here. So when the strike happened, and the 1933, when the union came in, this is where the first mine workers met at, in this building. Upstairs was the gymnasium, which is now a bar, and then upstairs above that was where the insurance company was located at. So the people that are going to get recognized here today, I want them to know that you're standing on some very proud shoulders of a very proud people. And I'm proud to come into this hall and say, welcome here, welcome to solidarity, unity. This is Zoda, and I appreciate it, and I appreciate everybody coming here. With that, I'm going to turn this microphone over. That's the last thing I'm going to turn this microphone over to, and we have modern technology going here today. We have Kip Dotson on a computer, who was supposed to be here, but who was diagnosed with COVID yesterday. But she's going to be here online. We also have Amy Niehaus, retired from which union now, maybe?
Well, my union, which was the staff union, is Communication Workers of America.
Okay,
but
CWA.
Yes, but staff for the National AFL-CIO Organizing Institute.
Right. And Kip Dawson, of course, and Steffi Dumike. Bonnie Boyer cannot be here today, but I'm going to turn the microphone over to these ladies and let them talk about the women in the workforce.
Thank you.
We had decided early on that we would do a PowerPoint, but knowing my audience, and I know at least half of you, and also knowing how things get complicated with technology, Charlie and I decided way ahead of time that we were going to have copies to hand out, and lo and behold, we need the computer for Kip, and PowerPoint would be a pain in the butt, and we don't really need it. So you've got my notes. I hope that everybody enjoys them. I'm not going to read them verbatim, but I wanted to give you a sense. Kip and Amy and I have been talking about how to present really a history that goes back hundreds of years as to how women have been fighting for equality at work. And so the structure here is that I'm going to give this introduction that sort of, I hope, frames the fight that we have been undergoing. And then Kip has a response. She wants to talk about her experience as a coal miner, and also building unity with the black community and with her sisters in the mines. And then we have invited Amy to sort of be a respondent and talk about her experience and and how this fits in, how our comments have fit in with her history and her work. So on that, I'm just going to dive in here. I really want to frame this struggle or this question around the issues of fighting for human rights. In other words, the fight for women's equality is tightly knit in the United States and I think across the world with the fight for human rights and equal rights across society. Doing this research, I was happy to find this about First Nations women, that in fact we have a history in this continent of women having a lot of political power in their communities. That is, before the European settlers came and disrupted that. So we have, this is a quote from Marie Guillard, a French nun who worked with the First Nations people of Canada in the 17th century. And this is what she wrote about Iroquois women. These female chieftains are women of standing, and they have a deciding vote in the councils. They make decisions there like their male counterparts, and it is they who even delegated as first ambassadors to discuss peace. So women elders voted on hereditary male chiefs, and they could depose them. So there was a tremendous amount of political power in the hands of indigenous women on this continent. And I think that's sort of a place that we want to get back to. It has taken us hundreds of years, of course. And then the other big issue that really has framed our power in society has been the issue of slavery. And so when the fights for abolition of slavery really went hand in hand with the fights for women's equality, political equality, and social equality. And Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman are two women I just wanted to put in the mix there. Really were leading voices for anti-slavery. They themselves escaped enslavement and fought to end it. And also Sojourner Truth was a voice for women's equality and spoke about the need. I mean, there's a famous quote that I'll misquote, but apparently there weren't any recording devices at the time. And so, "Ain't I a woman" is the famous phrase that she is said to have uttered and pointed to her muscles. "Ain't I a woman? I've plowed. Somebody else here probably can say it from memory. But she really stated, she really put it in the front that enslaved women deserved rights, deserved equal rights, human rights, and that that was part of her fight. So as we go through our history, we look at the Emancipation Proclamation as an important place to start. It did not, of course, apply to non-rebellious states, which I had forgotten, I perhaps knew, but so these issues, when the proclamation was issued in January of 1863, it stated that all persons held as slaves within the rebellious states are henceforth to be free. But that didn't explain what would happen in New York or in Missouri or the other states that still had held slavery. So that continued to be a fight. Women's suffrage then was taken up by a lot of women, upper class women and working women. It became sort of the demand for sort of the progressive women's movement of the 19th century. But it wasn't until 1920 that we had universal suffrage for women in this country. As it's been said, women take the vote. We fought for the vote. We took the vote. It wasn't given to us. So it's the 19th Amendment that we have been commemorated a couple of years ago. And so I'm going to just skip into sort of the fight for wage equality and for work equality. Full of labor historians and a couple of labor lawyers who could really fill in the blank here. But I want to say that the Equal Pay Act of 1963 is one that my generation ended up benefiting from quite immediately when I entered the workforce. That was an issue that I began to understand, and that my employment as of the 60s, since I'm a child of the 50s, was really impacted upon by the Equal Pay Act. And again, this was not a complete victory, and it was a further fight that for the amendment for the Lilly Ledbetter Act of 2009. Lilly Ledbetter had been in management at Goodyear Tire and was paid significantly less than her male counterparts for her career, which she didn't find out for like 20 or 30 years of her work. And when she suddenly found out that she was paid a lot less, she filed a suit. But the law at that time only allowed you to go back so far. She couldn't go back the whole 20 years. So the Lilly Ledbetter Act tried to fill that gap. But it's a constant fight. And again, to wrap back into that period, the 60s represented the central fight for civil rights in this country. So the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is the act upon which many of the cases that led those of us on this panel, or at least Kip and I, to be hired in the jobs that we got in mining and in steel are based on the Civil Rights Act of 1964. I put Fannie Lou Hamer in here. She was a fighter for voting rights in the 60s, a very important and strong voice for voting rights. She herself was raised on lived on a plantation, former plantation, was kicked off that plantation when she became active. She continued to fight. She was one of the founders of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, really an important fight for voting rights in the South. As we look at what happened with the Civil Rights Act, leaders such as Ola Kennedy, who came from my union, she was a rank and filer who was from the Chicago area. I raised her up because she is someone who helped to establish the women's committees in the Steelworkers Union in that district, which was then number 31, District 31, now it's District 7. She was active in the ad hoc committee of Concerned Black Steelworkers, which was a group of black steelworkers who were also trying to fight for civil rights, fight for equal opportunity within the mills. The steel mills across the U.S. had various ways of discriminating against people. We remember, I see my friend Barney in the back, and those of you who also worked in the mills might remember the days when all of the stonemasons were miraculously mostly Italian. And but the metal shop was mostly Polish, and so and the electricians, the highest paid, they were mostly, well, some kind of, what we call them, Johnny Bull last name, an English last name. So there was built-in discrimination within the mills that U.S. Steel was very active in keeping us separate. So it wasn't until the 1974 consent decree, which was imposed really upon the union and the company, that brought that very deliberate discrimination to a close. That consent decree happened because of a series of lawsuits that were filed across the country, most notably in Alabama and Pennsylvania, to fight for equal rights in the steel industry. So it's that settlement, well, to go step back to the Civil Rights Act, women were added to that legislation as an afterthought. A Southern congressman added "and the women" at the end of the list of who would benefit from the Civil Rights Act, hoping that it would then dead end, would trash the legislation. But we were fortunate to have it pass. But we were really, nobody still thought that we should have equal rights or opportunity. The consent decree ended that. We were added to the consent decree as well, in spite of the fact that it was the black men who had filed the suits that we were named under. And so we ended up having an opportunity to get these jobs in the steel industry. The consent decree coming down in the 70s, those of us who, I guess most of us in this room lived through that period, it had goals, and there were we were covered to a certain extent in the way that women were to get half, women and blacks and people with Spanish surnames were to get half of the bids to get into the trades and crafts, because it was really the trades and crafts that we had been kept out of, as well as being able to move around. Nobody could move from department to department before the consent decree. All seniority was based in the departments. So you might have a dozen or 2 dozen different departments, and wherever you were hired into is where you were forced to stay, unless you wanted to lose all your seniority. And so that was a very important piece that actually released a lot of the white guys who were trapped. In my case, I worked at Clairton Coke Works, were trapped on the batteries. They didn't have the social pull or the right last name to get them hired into the trades and crafts. So it was an equalizing force, not just for women, blacks, and people with Spanish surnames across the industry, but also for the white men who did not have the political pull. The Steelworkers Union was a co-negotiator of this settlement, and so it was generally accepted across the union, although there was a committee coming out of Urban Works that fought pretty hard to deny us those rights. But so it was that consent decree was one of 3, I believe, nationwide in industry that began to pull us up and to define what this Civil Rights Act of 1964 would really mean in terms of our work. So the other thing that we have fought for has been the Equal Rights Amendment. It's been proposed. I think we were trying to revive it to say that, yeah, we have equal rights in all parts of society. That's still not on the books. Where I want to end this is to introduce our colleague Kip Dawson, and a little bit about the Coal Employment Project. It was a nonprofit in Tennessee, and it was a group that fought similarly to how it worked in the steel industry, fought to get women in to the mines, into the jobs in the coal industry.
Okay, this is Kip speaking. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much to Steffi for that wonderful overview of history, which is different from what you read in most history books that gets us to where women got into the steel and coal industries. I need to say a really special thank you to Nick Molnar, who is my union brother. I was in District 5, but Nick has done so much to make this event happen, and his recognition that wanted to have a place for women's voices here was really important. But that's not new to Nick, because Nick has had women colleagues in the mines in District 2, including our sister Bonnie Boyer, with whom he worked for many years as part of the union that women had really invaded by that point in large numbers. And I'll get back to that in a minute. Another special thanks to Charlie McAllister, who's envisioned this event and did so much to make it happen despite the obstacles that came up along the way. And especially to the Battle of Homestead Foundation. And it's an honor to be a part of this tremendous history that everybody in the Battle of Homestead Foundation and my down the street neighbor John Here's voice today, bringing that home, all the great work that you have done. I'd like to just step out of timeline just for a second to raise a voice with you, a name with you. Lisa Parnell Christensen, a sister coal miner whose stories could exemplify everything that is real and important about what we're talking about today, is being buried today. Lisa was a strong and powerful Alabama coal mining sister and her family is grateful to be a part of the big family that women miners have brought together around Lisa, and I'll mention that a little bit more, but they, knowing that we are mentioning her name and celebrating her life today as they are burying her, is meaning a lot to them, as well as to the women miners around the country who are still united as an organization, and I'll get to that in a minute. Steffi's history is extraordinarily important, and certainly the history of the women miners fits right in there. The 1974 consent decree, as she had mentioned, wasn't meant by the people who originally filed the lawsuits to open the doors to women in coal mines. But oh my goodness, did it do that. And so it wasn't until 1974 that women who for a long time in coal fields around the country would have given anything to make half the money and have half the job security that the coal miners had in their areas, first began to realize or have a situation in which they could work to get into the mines. But as you all know, especially the labor lawyers among you and every worker among you who has ever struggled, once a law is passed or a judge has decreed something, doesn't mean it's going to happen. It's going to take mighty force of organized people to take a door that has creaked open and slam it all the way open so that people can walk through it. And that's what happened with women who wanted to get into coal mines around the country. And we were blessed from the very beginning by the vision of a young woman attorney named Betty Jean Hall, who realized that if women were actually going to be able to get into the mines, they were going to need organized solidarity and support. And she is the founder of the Coal Employment Project, which began in 1977 in Tennessee, as Steffi has mentioned, and which came to life all over the United States as women started to beat down the doors to get hired into the mines and found that they needed organized support. Eventually, the United Mine Workers became a part of that support, but not until the women miners and the women would-be miners themselves took it on themselves to organize. And from 1977 up to now, because this organization still exists, primarily as a history bringing together and solidarity organization, women miners and women would-be miners came together in the Coal Employment Project, which in 1979 evolved its name into the Coal Employment Project / Women Miners Support Team. In 1979, we had our first of what we're going to turn into annual conventions of women seeking jobs in the mines and women seeking to hold on to those jobs and encourage others to get in. And from the very start, even though many women didn't know that it was black steelworkers who had made the legal moves that got us to where we were getting, there was a solidarity across racial lines which was palpable, partly because among the women who first started to beat down the doors to get into the mines, including here in Pennsylvania, were African American women who had grown up in coal camps or who knew coal miners, who had brothers who worked in the mines, who were determined that once those doors finally began to open, they were going to be among the people who got hired. I'm going to mention one person in particular because you've just seen her picture on the material that Steffi has sent out. And that last photograph is a picture of little me, but with my amazing sister Carol Davis, as she was known in the mining time, Carol Davis Jones, as we were at a reunion of women working in various different unions. At that time, she was a member of the SEIU, and I was a member of the Pittsburgh Federation of Teachers, but we came together with the spirit of our time as coal miners and in the Coal Employment Project, binding us still. Carol's story is an incredible one, and I know that SEIU people who are here can tell more about how she carried it forward after the mines. And I'd love to talk just about her and Lisa, and then you would get a real sense of the kind of humans that these women coal miners were and are. But I want to give you a little bit more background so that you know what we're talking about. Because the Coal Employment Project became quickly a national organization. I mentioned that we had conferences every year from 1979 all the way through to 1992, and then some that were not as annual, the last one being in 2013 at Eastern Tennessee State University. But listen to the names of the places where these conferences happened. Because at each one of these, women miners who had formed local chapters of the Coal Employment Project alongside their United Mine Workers of America brothers. Because from the start, women miners knew that we would only be as strong as our union was, and that we needed the union and the union needed us. And so from the very start, the women miners reached out to the United Mine Workers and said, here we are, we want to build alongside you. And slowly but surely all over the country, and the United Mine Workers came to rejoice at our presence. I came from a local where this was particularly true, and I'll mention something about that in a minute. So here's where our conferences were held. The first one, Institute, West Virginia, which is near Morgantown. Second one in Beckley, West Virginia. Then Carbondale, Illinois. Owensburg, Kentucky. Linden Hall, Pennsylvania. Charleston, West Virginia. Price, Utah. Paintsville, Kentucky. Birmingham, Alabama. Back in Pittsburgh. Springfield, Illinois. Norton, Virginia. Glenwood Springs, Colorado. Another in Pittsburgh. On the Navajo Reservation in Arizona. Then again in Charleston, Birmingham, Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, where we're members of the same union. And then the final one before the one in Eastern Tennessee State University was held in John L. Lewis's hometown of Lucas County, Iowa. We were a national organization, but we also were an international one. And from the start, led by African American women, hillbilly women, horseback riding women in Wyoming, Northern Appalachian women in Pennsylvania, where we had a very strong presence, women in central Illinois and Indiana, and a national group. But we were more than that. We were part of the heartbeat of the United Mine Workers during the very bitter and yet beautiful struggles of the 1980s, when the companies were out to destroy our unions and did make big cuts into the strength of the United Mine Workers, but at the same time were met with resolute fight back on the part of the Steelworkers Union and certainly the United Mine Workers Union. And every step of the way, women coal miners were a part of that. We also reached out internationally because in some circles, the 1980s are known as the Reagan/Thatcher years. Because simultaneously we're trying to destroy the United Mine Workers in the United States with Ronald Reagan at the helm. He was best buddies with Margaret Thatcher, who was doing the same thing in the coal fields in Great Britain. And in 1984, when our brothers and sisters went on striking against the Thatcher regime's attempt to destroy the Union in Britain, women miners in the United States were right there alongside the miners' wives who were organizing solidarity in Britain. And we formed a solidarity there that lives to this very day, with miners' wives coming to the United States and traveling the coal fields, organized by women miners, taking them around, and our United Mine Workers brothers, and with miners from the United States going to Britain and touring the coal fields in solidarity with our British sisters and brothers. And that same kind of solidarity extended in many ways to the natural inclination of these feisty women who had gone into the mines to spread the glorious struggles that we were doing at home for our union and with our union to places around the world. And our women did some amazing traveling. Some of the women went to India and China, spreading the word of solidarity among women workers and unionism in those countries. We traveled all over the case. My local union sent me to El Salvador in 1986 in solidarity with workers there who were organizing a union and needed people from the United States to come and protect them from the death squads just by our presence when they held their first annual congregation to form a federation of unions there. We were a feisty bunch, and Nick Molnar, I'm sure, is grinning when he thinks about Bonnie Boyer, because she represented, and still does, that same kind of spirit. We went through big battles. The two big ones in the 1980s that changed the future of the United Mine Workers were the struggle in 1984-85 against A.T. Massey Corporation, which was out to destroy our union and took some big bites out of it. And in 1989, the big strike against Pittston Coal, where also we suffered some big setbacks, but we didn't give up. We kept going. We kept the struggle going. And we have much to be proud of in that struggle. And the solidarity that we were able to build with other unions, for example, the Meat Packers Union, when they went on strike, P9 locals in Iowa against the meat packing companies that were also out to destroy unions and were pretty successful. Those kinds of solidarity actions live on. Our unions are not as strong as we were in the 1980s. We are not. And yet, because history is not a one-way up or down story, as my mother liked to describe it, we are on a spiral, we humans, and our history is a spiral. There are times when it looks like we're going way backwards, and certainly there are many instances of that in today's world. But we are never going lower than we started. In fact, we keep building on the history of those who made the struggles happen. The history that Steffi presented to you here, the history that came before that and continued since it. We keep moving up, even though sometimes we have lost. We keep building on the struggles we've had before us. And here I want to give a tip of the hat to all of those historians who are sitting in this room and to the Battle of Homestead Foundation. Because if it were not for you who are keeping alive our stories, then we would be going slowly downhill right now. But we're not doing that. We are building on the history that we are not only keeping alive, but we're making even more alive. And a tip of the hat right now I have to give to the West Virginia University History Department and the young women who have been working so hard to bring these stories into safekeeping and to build on them. I want to mention in particular, going back to the woman I started with, Lisa Parnell Christensen. Lisa was a coal miner in Alabama who epitomized the recognition that black workers and white workers needed and still need to recognize our common need and to work and build together. And down there in Alabama, a very alive part of the United Mine Workers, as you can see in the recent strike that has just happened there against Warrior Met Coal, black and white miners standing together with women miners firmly right there in the middle and helping to hold things together. That struggle may not win the rights that the union miners went out to win. That is full union recognition at the mine and all the rights that go along with it. But it's keeping alive in Alabama what the black workers who got us that consent decree were out to get. And that is that we are in this stuff together and we are going to continue to build together. And today, at Lisa's funeral, that spirit is being celebrated by her family and by the miners and the other people of Alabama who are gathering to say goodbye to her, and as her sister put it, to say that Lisa is gone, but she will not be forgotten. Because the West Virginia University students who interviewed her for oral history are keeping her voice right there alongside all the other voices that you all, everybody in this room, has been working and will continue to work to make sure do not disappear. And as one of our sisters said, if Lisa were sitting in this room right now, she would have a big grin on her face. She would look at all of you, she would raise her fist, and she would say, hey, buddies, brothers and sisters, don't mourn for me. Joe Hill said it right. We got to keep organizing. And it's in that spirit that I want to thank you all very much for making this event happen and for making it possible for me to be with you. That was not easy, I know that. I am so grateful, and I'm so happy to sit back and listen now as the rest of you play this forward. In solidarity, forward ever.
I'm going to try and pull this together. All of you here are here because you know a little bit about history, you want to celebrate victories of history, you want to see a better future for other people, not just ourselves. That's how unions work. Quick story. My grandfather, I never had the pleasure of meeting him. He was a New York City fireman. He died young from work-related injuries. No Social Security, no union, no nothing. Grandma, who I also never met, marched for women's rights to vote. I'm hoping it's genetic. You know? She marched for women's right to vote. My mother said she must have been organizing because she went to meetings a lot. Good. My mother skipped that. She was too busy raising us and fighting for herself, which was important. But these things impact your communities. And I live in Somerset County. I live down the road in Payne Township, right on Spruce Run. You want to check out the fish, call me. Although I don't kill them there, they're too precious. Everybody knows Clear Shade? Who knows Clear Shade, how good that is? Anybody know Spruce Run? That's also a naturally reproducing wild trout stream. So anyway, what it does, when you become active, you don't have to be working to be active. I've been retired 10 years now. I love raising hell. There's lots of things we can do for our community, for our children, for our friends, for our neighbors, because labor is the foundation of good communities. People have jobs that don't pay them enough to come home and take care of their kids. That's not very uplifting. People have jobs where they can come home with their paycheck and take care of their family. The community comes up. It's something very, very important to remember. Myself, I got so lucky. My mother told me to learn how to type because I didn't have the patience to wait on tables. I type 125 words a minute. I can't wait on tables. I tried to relieve a friend who was tending bar once. I couldn't even keep up with a shot and a beer. So it's hard work. So tip your servers, talk to your servers, teach your children, talk to your neighbors. It makes a difference because I had the privilege. I didn't listen to my mother. She wanted me to go to secretarial school. I said, I can already type and take shorthand and correct the boss's grammar. I don't think I'm going to waste 2 years. I wound up at a major university because she waited on tables so brother could go to college. He was a C student and was hiding his failing grades in his sock drawer. I was a girl. I should learn how to type. Okay, but it worked out just fine because I went there in 1967 and there were all these wonderful students looking for a worker to organize, and there I was. And that was the biggest gift I ever got. Because when I realized you could get stuff, one of the things we did was we fought for a daycare center because there were a lot of people there who had to take care of the kids while they were working. So that was one of our first fights when we got a daycare center. We tried petitions, we tried talking, finally we took our kids to work and changed diapers on the president of the university's desk, and we got a daycare center. Same thing with work. I left there and then I moved to New Jersey. I got tired of Long Island, a little boring, but anyway. And there, because I had taken a civil service test, I was doing office work before I got there. Well, I got a job in a plant that paid a lot more and I didn't have to know anything yet. I had to work my butt off, but I made more money. And it was a plant where women had to wear skirts. We had to wear uniforms because it was a soap plant. We wore skirts. I started there in 1974. What do you think happened next? They gave us pants and we took men's jobs. We made more money and it was easier. Sorry, gentlemen. Now, the mines, I got to tell you, I don't know if I could do that, to be perfectly honest. Okay? But they did have one machine there that was a big shaker. That back when they used to use powdered soap all the time, They had a big thing. It was about maybe a quarter the size of this room with a grate on the bottom. You got to get into it, and it would vibrate to break up the clumps. And you're in there with high boots, a hoe, and a face mask breaking up laundry clumps. Yeah, that I sort of could do. I don't think I'd make it in the mines. So how many here ever worked in the mines? Congratulations, thank you. Finally, a job I definitely could not do. So anyway, what you do makes a huge difference. That legislation that they were just talking about is the reason I didn't have to pack soap anymore. Because packing soap was the worst job. Every muscle from your fingertips to your neck would be screaming as you're grabbing 12 bars of soap and stick them in the case. I got to be a machine operator. And the people who were packing the soap, because I knew that, I said, you give me the high sign when you need an extra break. Because the machine operator didn't have to do anything unless the machine jammed. But this machine was magic. It would jam whenever the packers needed a break. The foreman loved us too because we were making good production. We weren't goofing off. We were ready to make a record of how many cases that line ran. Got down to the last case. Do we want to break the record? I asked the packers. They said, nah. The guy on the next line was going nuts, jumping up and down like a terrier. What's the matter with you girls? What's that? I said, what's it to you? He said, I'm a stockholder. And with this I'll end. I told him to go hold his stock. So what you do matters. So do it. Vote. Volunteer. Tell people about history. Tell people about current events. Because if you're just listening, and the local stations are just as bad now since Sinclair bought them, if that's their only source of knowledge, we're not giving them everything we can give them. So spread the word, spread your efforts. We can change things and make things a lot better. Thank you.
Say the Lord's Prayer together. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Glory to the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, now and into ages. Amen. The Lord Jesus Christ, God, bless this gathering. Nourish all those here present. Bless the food that's prepared for us, and nourish these people to continue the struggle for justice in the workplace. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, now and ever into ages of ages. Amen. Amen.
I want to thank the ladies this morning that put together the program that they did. And you all need to know that with the COVID striking right in the middle of this, and my friend Carson Bruning, who is fit to be here to have a display of 1800s mining tools up until the early 1960s, he got COVID too. So trying to pull a program together during a COVID outbreak in Western Pennsylvania turned out to be a real learning curve. But I wanted to thank the ladies. Like I said, there was Kip Dawson, Steffi Dumike, Amy Niehaus for their outstanding work. And to put a program like this together takes a lot of people. I mean, we had Harriet, who was over at her place in Greensburg, right? Outside of Greensburg. Her and Melanie on the phone, back and forth, trying to put together an outline of the program and getting mailings out to local unions and stuff. Larry McCullough, who put together an outstanding program for the press, for press coverage for this. And Charlie McCollister, wherever his at, there he is, standing up already, waiting for applause. Charlie and I spent every night, I guess for the past month or two on the phone saying, okay, we need to do this, we need to do that, this isn't going to work, and trying to move things together. It was a yeoman's job, and there was a lot of hands on deck. The president of the Pennsylvania Labor History Society, the president of the Battle of Homestead Society, I called them up, and it was, okay, this is what you need. If that's what you need, you got it. And it was taken care of. It was, like I said, it was just all hands on deck, and it worked out really well. And I want to give all these people that I haven't mentioned and those I have mentioned a hand. Thank you. Excuse me? I also want to say that there's a dinner bucket sitting down there on the end of one of the tables, and the young lady that did all the cooking has actually 4 jobs. She works in a rehabilitation center. She works here as a bartender part-time at the, I believe she told me, at the VFW part-time. And she has another part-time job. I can't remember what it was right now, but she's working 4 part-time jobs plus a full-time job. So if you would, please be generous and give her a tip.
She needs a union.
And by the way, that is my old dinner bucket there. So. So anyhow, I wanted to introduce somebody that I think is an asset to this community. And that's the president of this club, who's been holding this club together now for I don't know how many years. 23 years. And this is the second time we've been into this community as the Pennsylvania Labor History Society and the Battle of Homestead Society. And this is the first time I get to introduce Sterling to you ladies and gentlemen. So I'm going to let Sterling say a few words to you all. Sterling?
Let's see if I can get the right side of the mic. Did I? Yeah. Okay, that sounds good. My name's Sterling Mistorovich. I'm the president of the Slovac Educational Society, the club. And today you're in a building called that used to not be the club originally. Our original club was a plank building that was built back in 1902. And over the years, it became inefficient, even with an old coal furnace, which fired the building. And they eventually, in 1950, moved into this building. This building was originally the Jednota Society, which was the Slovak, and Nick just filled me in that it was called the Unity Insurance Company, or the Jednota. And the Jednota outgrew the building about 1950, and they moved to Lancaster. And they've since branched out. They have 2 locations. They have one in Ohio and they have one in Michigan. That's about all I really know about the Jednota, other than that I do have some policies for the Slovaks at my house in case they want to buy one, but nobody's really pushing that, you know what I mean? Today, if you wish to tour our museum, we have a cultural museum on the 2nd floor of our building. It's not the biggest museum, like the Jednota has an entire building. However, we do have some artifacts from the churches, from the mining community here in Windber, and also some traditional garb and Slovak society stuff, you know what I mean? We have some clothing, we have money, we have whatever you want to see. We have a chart upstairs of all the family crests from Slovakia. It's pretty interesting just to see all that stuff. Joe Elias originally started that museum way back in the day, and he gave me several tours of it and tried to teach me as much as he could. But in the course of teaching me, he passed away. Not really much else to tell you. I get kind of emotional about that because Joe was really knowledgeable. And I used to love him because he used to talk with his hands, sort of like what I'm doing right now. But when he would talk with his hands were always up in the air. You know, it'd be like, yeah. You don't understand. But it was funny. I mean, growing up around the Slovac Club and being part Slovak has really been really interesting over the years, and I really appreciate the fact, and that's why I've tried to help stay in office and make sure the club doesn't close. Because there's too many people that, you know, they'd love to just sell the building, sell the assets, and try to split the money, and they think they're going to get really big money, but when you sit down and you figure out all of the membership and how it would be split, they'd really make maybe $1.20, something like that, you know what I mean? It's ridiculous. I'm not going to take any more of your time, but I am very glad to see the attendance here today. It is fantastic. I really never anticipated this many people, and I think it's awesome. I'm very, very glad for your society and the committees that you have working for you. They are great people. And as far as the club, like I said, I'll be open up to anybody that wants to tour the museum. Okay, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Stan. Really appreciate it. This is somewhat like open mic, because this is important. A really good friend of ours passed away, and Jan wanted to say a few words about her.
Kenny's going to hold the microphone for me.
Okay, yes, ma'am.
Oh, you're going to do it? Okay, good. Hi, my name is Jan Lohman. I'm from northeastern Pennsylvania, and I'm out of the Communications Workers of America. Unlike Jim Young, I do have an ancestor that was in the coal mines. It was my great-grandfather, and I was able to get his name on the Miners Memorial in downtown Wilkes-Barre on Public Square. There are about a couple hundred names of anybody that worked in the mines. They didn't have to be miners, but anything to do with the mines. However, I'm here to talk about our dear friend Lois Hartel. Lois passed away a few months ago in Florida, where she moved after retiring from the ILGWU. She requested no memorial service or obituary. So this is kind of serving to let people know and spread the word. If anybody you know that knew her, I'd appreciate you letting them know. There's no official notice in the paper. I met Lois at the Greater Wilkes-Barre Labor Council union counseling classes in the late 1970s. We became friends when we both became big sisters in the Big Brothers Big Sisters program. As time went by, we became involved in many AFL-CIO union activities together. Pennsylvania Labor History Society members will remember her dedication to our group, serving as treasurer for many years. Lois was also secretary-treasurer for the Greater Wilkes-Barre Labor Council. Lois received the Joseph Byrne National United Way Award for all her community service to many organizations. She was also a member of the Pennsylvania State Women's Commission. She used her savings to start the Women's Resource Center in Scranton. Lois was a friend, mentor, and generous to all.
Thank you. For those of you who've never met Lois Hartel, you've missed an outstanding person that I've met in my life. She was about this tall and weighed maybe 50 pounds soaking wet, and she was one heck of a hellraiser. But anyhow, thank you for that, Jan. Right now, is Elizabeth Ricketts here? Oh, Elizabeth, I didn't see you come in. I was hoping you were here. Elizabeth is going to talk to us about John Brophy. John Brophy was the president of District 2 at one time, and it's kind of like my personal hero, and I believe that Mrs. Ricketts is going to go through and explain exactly who John Brophy was. With that, I want to hand the mic over to you.
Hey everyone, really happy to be here and really grateful for all of the work that all of you guys do. I teach history at IUP, and my specialization is working class history, and my writing is mostly about the coal mine communities in District 2. I don't have any coal miners in my family. I came out of this from a purely intellectual background. I was at Emory and trolling through the library as you used to be able to do. And I came across a little book called A Miner's Life and sat down, and I think I read that whole thing in one sitting and fell in love with John Brophy and said to my advisor, I want to write my dissertation about this district and about this man. So that's what I did. And you know, I came as an outsider, and I just found every coal miner I could find and talked to them about their experiences and tried to make sure that every word I wrote, somebody authentic read it and said, yes, that's right. Did a lot of digging, sometimes didn't write things that people kind of wanted to hear, but I've always tried to let history do the talking. And so Charlie asked me if I would talk a little bit about John Brophy and his programs of worker education. John Brophy was born in England. His parents are Irish, very loyal Irish, very interested in Irish politics and in British politics. They came to the United States to try to find a better life for their children. When John Brophy was 8, he had just completed 3rd grade in Catholic school, and that was about the end of his really formal education. They moved around a lot in Indiana and Cambria counties looking for work in the mines, and so John was able to go to school a couple of months here and a couple of months there. But when he entered the mines at the age of 12, that was it, formal education. But John Brophy is considered a labor intellectual in the United States. He's completely self-educated. He loved to read. He would read anything he could get his hands on. And in those days, a lot of stuff, newspapers would come in on trains, and they would circulate through the entire community. And Brophy would read everything there was to read. And there were a lot of labor papers at the time. He especially liked the Pennsylvania Grit, which was about labor and had a special section about coal mining. But he read that faithfully, read many other newspapers faithfully. His mother was a housekeeper, and she would bring magazines and books home from her job. After he went to work, he would save his money. He still lived at home with his parents. And he saved his money, and he would buy books from the Sears Roebuck catalog. And his mother would save soap box tops. There you go. Because you could turn in those soap box tops for books. So he liked the big ones, like Dickens, you know, that's a lot of words. Lasted longer. Dickens, Shakespeare, you know, Socrates, whatever he could get his hands on, and standard histories. Then he was always very active in the Union, and he managed to get himself blacklisted around 1910. And he went to Michigan, where he worked near Detroit, and had access to real libraries and to the debating societies that were very popular at the time. He met Daniel de Leon and his son Solon, and they were socialists. He was not really into their left-leaning socialism, but he loved listening to them and reading all the things that they recommended. He got to go to the Mine Workers Convention. That was the last one that John Mitchell attended, and he was so really enthralled with being able to see John Mitchell. And so he read a lot. He went to the debating societies. He started reading economics, political theory, and really became incredibly educated through his own efforts. And he talked about how hard it was after a day's work in the mines to do any reading, but he said that is the really good thing about strikes. I get a lot of reading done. So, and they're not all bad. Anyway, he came back to District 2 in 1914, and in 1916, he was elected president of the district. He would have been about, I think, 31 at the time, and was just incredibly dynamic. He so cared about people. And that's just an important thing to know about Brophy. He was a very highly educated but modest man, and he cared about individual people, whoever they were. So there were problems going on at the time. Mining was very, a lot of overcapacity in mining. We had far more mines than we had demand for coal. And so that was a problem that World War I solved temporarily, but it actually made the problem worse because many people opened new mines. And so when the demand of war ended, then people were really in trouble. And overcapacity was about 100%, and miners were working about 2 to 3 days a week, and by the time we get to the mid-20s, it's often 2 to 3 days a month. And so you can imagine how hard it is to maintain the union and union solidarity in that kind of an environment. So Brophy began right away, as soon as he became president of the union, he began educational programs because he believed in the intelligence of the working class. And he believed that the working class should be the first class in society. These were the people who created all wealth, and these should be the people who made the decisions about economics and about society. And as far as he was concerned, the only reason that workers were not in better positions was because they were being denied education. They were being kept ignorant on purpose. And as an ignorant population, in that they didn't have very much education, and what they did tended to be, the teachers are hired by the companies and they teach the company line to their students. So he was very concerned about that. So he went around the district setting up educational classes, talking at union meetings, talking about basically the economics of the industry and what needed to be done. So at this time, the rank and file of the United Mine Workers nationally was very interested in nationalization of the mines. This was going on in England. They were very interested in it. They felt like this was a way to rationalize the mining industry. And coming out of World War I, the government had taken over the mines and the railroads, and they actually liked working under government control. They had increased safety, they had steadier work, of course a lot of that was because of the war, and they just felt it was a more democratic place for them to be. So they supported it a lot. In 1920, John L. Lewis became president of the United Mine Workers. John L. Lewis was a business unionist, and that was gaining a lot of popularity. And this is a pivotal moment in labor history, really, where people are having to decide if they're going to be business unionists or more progressive unionists. John L. Lewis was a business unionist. The man was very conservative. I know he has a reputation of being very militant. He knew how to talk. He was not militant. The man voted Republican in every single election except one. And let me remind you that Franklin Roosevelt ran 4 times, right? His dream in life was to be vice president in a Republican administration. And if you think he didn't sell out the Windber miners in 1922, you're wrong. He did. But he wasn't alone in feeling that. John, and the point of being a business unionist is that you turn over to the company all control of production anything to do with that end of things, any economics, any production, and you only concentrate on wages, hours, fringe benefits, conditions. That's it. Other progressive unionists want to maintain and expand a presence on the shop floor, and people were losing that. But miners were still craft workers. I know they're rural and they're underground, but they own their own tools. They are not bossed. In Pennsylvania, a foreman only had to visit once a week, and they never did that. You had to go find the foreman and drag him to your workplace and explain to him what the conditions were and negotiate with him. And one of the main rules of mining was never let the foreman see you work. He has no right to see you work. You talk, he's there to support you. That's different. But that was being threatened by the introduction of mechanization, which, and the goal of that was to turn the mine into a factory. And people said that quite openly. We're going to turn the mines into a factory. We're going to get rid of these crazy independent miners who think that they can decide when they're going to work, how they're going to do it, and they're going to try to boss us around. They're going to become followers after machines. And so you can see, there's a tension there in the mining industry, but in other industries as well. So, cutting out a few things, in 1921, John Brophy became the chairman of the UMWA Nationalization Research Committee. At the national conventions every year, rank and file miners voted overwhelmingly to push politically for nationalization of the mines. John L. Lewis was not interested in this at all, but he was forced to establish this committee, and he appointed Brophy as chair and two other sort of progressive mine district presidents as committee members. Now, I really can't figure out why he did that. It was a stupid thing to do, right? He didn't want nationalization. I think he thought that committees is where ideas go to die. And that he would put Brophy and Clint Golden and William Mitch in charge, not Clint Golden, Chris Golden, in charge, and they wouldn't be able to come up with anything, and then they'd have to shut up. And it would kind of go away. Well, that's not what happened. Because Brophy, because of his interest in education, he had made connections with several organizations that had come out of really the Red Scare after World War I. One of those was the ACLU, but others included the Bureau of Industrial Research, the League of Industrial Democracy, and the Workers' Education Bureau. Those were all located in New York. And he went there frequently. He worked with helping set up Brookwood Labor College, which is in upstate New York. And he set up a program in District 2 where anyone who went to the classes, the education classes, could apply to go to Brookwood. And if they were selected, and they selected one a year, they were fully funded at Brookwood Labor College. So in addition to those classes, they had citizenship classes, they had English language classes, and they just did whatever they could to try to help workers position themselves to be able to participate more as citizens. So now he's head of the Nationalization Committee. He gets the Bureau of Industrial Research to agree to do all the legwork and get all the data. They work for 2 years together, and they come up with a very comprehensive plan for the government to purchase all the coal lands in the U.S. for the price of somewhere between $1.5 and $2 billion, and then to run them in a set of districts that would be a tripartite union, engineers, and management, and the public, representatives of the public. okay? Mining engineers, union members, and representatives of the public. Yeah, I feel like I have an echo when I do this, but okay. So they then published about a 45-page pamphlet called How to Run Coal. They took it to John Lewis, and he said, I'm not interested. He would not allow the United Mine Workers Journal to publish it. He wouldn't allow any information about it at the annual conference. And so Brophy, then began a different type of program of education to try to educate miners and other workers and the public outside of the purview of the United Mine Workers. Now, there were some district newspapers, like in Illinois, they published it. He cut it down to about a 10-page pamphlet. The survey, which became the Survey Graphic, which is kind of like the Atlantic today, published it in full and promoted it. There were a number of labor newspapers that published it. And so the word was kind of getting out. And this was, of course, added to these classes that they were having. He also brought a fellow named, oh my goodness, am I going to forget? I'll think of it in a minute. McAllister Coleman from the Bureau of Industrial Research to live in District 2 for 2 years, to go underground, work with the miners, and try to figure out if it would be possible to mechanize, which of course is going to come, without losing the miners' freedom, that kind of independent craftsmanship. And actually, Carter Goodrich comes up with a plan where you would have a team that worked, the team would be paid, and the team would decide how the work was going to proceed. So that became part of what then went into huge open shop drive. And it happens in the district as well. And now we've got people who are working maybe 5 or 6 days a month. That's all they're working. And so they close mines, operators close mines, and they won't let people accrue debt at the company store. They start kicking them out of company housing. It's getting really bad, but they have signs up that says, as soon as we get enough miners who will agree to the 1917 $5 scale, we will reopen the mines. And we will keep all other parts of the union contract, except the wage scale. You'll still have your check weighman. You'll still have all this stuff. This starts to break the union, as you can imagine. The other thing that's going on is that people are saying, why are we in this mess? Why don't we have work? And the operators plug into a group that has really grown over the last couple of years, the KKK, who say it's these immigrants who are coming in here taking your jobs. And they're Catholic. And they're having billions of Catholic babies. And they are not only going to take your children's jobs, but they're going to grow up and vote and take over this country. And then we're going to lose our democracy because they're papists. And they aren't going to respect America. And people are buying this because there's a teeny bit of, well, you're right, there's a lot of immigrants. So maybe this is the Pope's plan. How do we know? The place is falling apart. Brophy really doesn't feel he can say much because he's Catholic. The union has said in 1923 that you can't be a member of the Klan and be a United Mine Worker. If you are a member of the Klan, you lose your membership in the United Mine Workers. But if you enforce that in District 2, Brophy felt like you wouldn't have, that would break the union right there. Certainly not all white Protestant miners were in the Klan, but enough were that it was really starting to be a serious problem, causing a lot of fracturing. So in 1924, And the other thing I have to mention in 1924, the guy who's running for president, one of the guys who's running for president, is Robert La Follette from Wisconsin. He's running on the Progressive Party. He's for nationalization. He's for full unionization. He's for ending restrictive labor laws. And he's for ending labor injunctions. And he is a good candidate for workers. And Brophy wants to advertise that because, of course, companies are accusing him, they're red baiting, right? They're accusing him of being a communist. So in the spring of 1924, when things really are starting to fall apart, District 2 gives John Brophy permission to start an education department. This is funded through some New York organization, one, the Garland Fund. This guy, Charles Garland, inherited millions of dollars and said he didn't deserve it because he hadn't earned it. And so he created a fund where he gave this money to workers' organizations who had innovative ideas. So Brophy, he got some money in the 22 strike and he, raised his hand again. There was a woman there, a philanthropist named Evelyn Preston. She also funded the program. And that enabled Brophy to hire an out-of-work miner and Methodist Episcopal minister whose name was Paul Fuller and who was extremely eloquent and very dedicated to the cause of workers. So they began increased number of classes, an effort to have classes. They first targeted the Broad Top region, which is in Huntingdon County, because the unions were breaking there, and they were really concerned. So Paul Fuller went over and started classes in 7 different communities. Every day he went, because they were weekly classes, teaching them about nationalization and the economics of nationalization. And they loved it. Most of them were out of work. And so again, they didn't have a lot to do. So they loved reading, coming to these classes, men and women, and debating, and then talking about it for the rest of the week, right? And reading some more. So, but things were still tough there. And Fuller said, look, these people are so depressed. They're so poor, they're hungry, they're depressed, they don't know how this is going to end. And so they came up with the idea to have labor chautauquas. And this idea comes out of course, Chautauqua, New York, but there were traveling chautauquas that came out of Chautauqua, New York, usually 3 to 5 days, and they came through a lot of the towns in this area. Nanty Glow had one every year, and they would raise the money to get the Chautauqua to come and then sell tickets and hopefully make back their money plus a little more, so maybe the next year or 2 years they could have 4 days instead of 3. And they loved it because it's national speakers. Also, they're more expensive for the better speakers, right? National speakers, entertainment, but they hadn't had this now for a few years. He said, well, let's do labor chautauquas. We can do this. So they did. They kind of figured out how to do it, and they had national level speakers, state level speakers and national level speakers who came and talked about serious things like economics, labor parties, nationalization, all of these deep topics. They made sure that they had classes in these communities before they had these chautauquas so that people were already grounded. Chautauquas were then open to everyone in the community and in the nearby areas. So it drew in farmers and storekeepers and other people who they could also explain how we're all in this together. If we make better wages, we can buy more food from the farmers, we can spend more in your store. It's to your advantage for us all to stick together as a community. Otherwise, the money is just going straight out of this community. So they had these speakers coming in. They usually did 7 days. They started with a big parade. I think pretty much everybody in the town was in the parade, and you'd kind of start and then you'd run back so you could watch later. I don't know. It seemed like everybody was in there. But every team, every band, every chorus, everything, every baseball team, everybody was in the parade at the beginning and at the end. And then in the evenings, they would have entertainment, local entertainment. The 6-year-old Kowalczyk boxing twins were a fan favorite. And little Sally, who could sing while her aunt played the piano. And, this was the type of thing they had. They could celebrate their local talent. They also had a junior Chautauqua, which I think was absolutely brilliant. Kept the kids interested and going through the day. They had this woman, Clara Johnson, who was from Sagamore. She was called the fighting teacher from Sagamore. And she ran the junior Chautauquas. And here are the kinds of things they did. They had lots of crafts. They rewrote fairy tales and fables and songs to make workers the heroes. And then they put on plays out of these fairy tales and fables at the end for the adults. And they had a choir that sang a lot of these rewritten songs that they had rewritten themselves. And the point was to teach them about, how the working class built and maintained the country, and to give them pride in who they were, and to give them, a way to counter what their teachers were probably saying to them. So the first one of these was held in 6 Mile Run, and the main speaker who came was a guy named Harry Laidler. He was the director of the League for Industrial Democracy. I don't think he'd ever been out of New York City, at least not significantly. And so he gets off the train in Huntingdon, somebody picks him up in a rattle-trap car, and they start out on these, dirt roads, right? They aren't really roads. And they're going up and down in the mountains. And Harry Laidler says he was pretty sure he was never going to see civilization again. That, he didn't know where he was going, but it was not going to be someplace he could come back from. And so then he gets out in this extremely remote place, and he's been told he's supposed to talk about nationalization, and he's going to talk to classes and give lectures, and he's going, oh my gosh, what am I going to tell these people? They don't know anything. But when he gets back home to New York, he writes an article that he publishes in the newspaper, and I believe it's in the survey as well, talking about how wrong he was about these people, talking about their intellectual prowess. These people understood and could discuss extremely complex economic, philosophical, and political theory. They were amazing. And it really changed his mind about the working class. And so he became a big proponent of education. Give these people a chance. Give them a chance to read, right? Don't keep this away from them. He was absolutely amazed. He said they asked questions that were so incredibly insightful and important. And so they went on then to have another, I think, 16 of these Chautauquas. And out of these Chautauquas, they built even more classes, and they also created a lot of Lafayette clubs, and people became very interested politically. And so it really was a success. By 1926, though, Brophy had decided that the only way the United Micro Workers was going to survive is if they had a change of leadership, and he decided to challenge Lewis for the presidency, which he did, and he won, but Lewis counted the votes. And we know he won. The evidence is clear. He knew he won. and he didn't really know what to do. Some people said you need to sue Lewis. He didn't want to do that. He didn't want to discredit the union. So he decided he would just continue to talk about what he called the miners program in a platform called Save Our Union. That he would continue to talk about that. He was now no longer president of the district. He didn't even have a job. And so he was pretty free to go around the country and present this material to everyone. And the miners program was nationalization of the mines, full unionization, a labor party, a 30-hour work week, 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, which was to share the work equally. And he went promoting that and was building up his candidacy to run again in 1928 against Lewis, when Lewis declared the Save Our Union movement a dual union and expelled him from the United Mine Workers. At that point, Brophy was living in Pittsburgh with his wife's family, and he decided that what he would do is to try to start a labor college in Pittsburgh. So he contacted 3 friendly Pittsburgh professors, University of Pittsburgh professors, who agreed to teach in the labor college. They talked to the University of Pittsburgh and got them to agree to let them have the free use of some rooms on campus. And so they began this labor college, small, but it was growing. However, of course, operators and others didn't like that. And so they went to the chancellor of the University of Pittsburgh and said, we're not going to give you any money. And so it ended up with the 3 faculty being run out of the university and having to leave and go somewhere else. And Brophy, of course, being denied use of the rooms. And at that point, that labor college collapsed after only a couple of years. But happily, and again, I don't know why, we get to the 30s, the CIO comes along, led by none other than John L. Lewis, who decides that as first director of the CIO, he wants John Brophy. So he looks him up, dusts him off, and puts him in charge as the first director of the CIO. He's in charge of SWOC, Steelworkers Organizing Committee, and he's able really to stay and work in labor for the rest of his life. But he always maintained such a confidence and dedication to teaching the working class everything so that they could be the leaders not only of their communities but of their nation and the world. And he so believed in that. And I'll end by saying what my husband always used to say whenever he ended a talk, which was, continue your good work.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Well, now, I believe that was a bit of an education for everybody. My wife and I one time went to Hastings, Pennsylvania. I guess it had been about a month or so beforehand. There was a dedication of a marker in Rossiter, PA, where they had a labor chautauqua, and we dedicated a marker up there, Pennsylvania historical marker, about the labor chautauqua in Rossiter, PA. Jimmy Wada, I believe Elizabeth was there, a bunch of us, and then we went to the next one they held where we put another marker in was in Hastings, Pennsylvania. Now, Hastings isn't a very big town, but I take a pleasure in telling you that this is where my wife's family was from Hastings, Pennsylvania. This is where my mother's family was from. We're sitting on the banks of the stream down in Hastings, Pennsylvania, looking at the program for the day, And guess whose names are in there? My grandfather's and her grandfathers were at the Labor Chautauqua in Hastings, Pennsylvania, and they were active participants in it. So, you know, our marriage was made in a Labor Chautauqua. So, yes, sir.
There's a historical marker in Naniglow too for John Brophy.
Yes.
He lived in Naniglow for a while, and it's right in the Mine Workers Park.
George Wallet is the president of the local union in Naniglow, Pennsylvania, which happens to also to be my home local union. And that's where John Brophy was from. I say that I said this earlier on, that John Brophy was a hero of mine. I think you understand why now. I think that he spoke and acted in the behalf of workers in the best interest of workers for all of his working life. Yeah, and I admire the man.
And I'll work all night and day. I am.
Sit down. Hey, I'm going to be very quick. My name is Chris Garlock. Some of you, that last name may be familiar. My dad is actually a labor historian in the family, did a bunch of research on the Knights of Labor. Still around, still doing labor history stuff. I host and produce Labor History Today podcast. And so two things. One is check it out, Labor History Today, any platform that you use, you can find it. But at lunch, it turned out I was sitting next to Howard, who has oral histories that he did with retired steelworkers. So my request is that if you have that sort of labor history sitting around or something else that I need to know about, and thank you for this fabulous program. That's me letting me mess around with recording this. Please see me today. I'll also be at the program tomorrow. But I'm trying to get this history out to the rest of the world. We would love the rest of the world to come here. But in the meantime, if we can get it out to the rest of the world through the wonderful world of podcast, I would appreciate your help.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm immediate past president of the Pennsylvania Labor History Society and have been involved with this organization for over 28 years. And it is the premier labor history organization in the Commonwealth that involves a lot of very, very good people who are very dedicated to the history of labor and working people. And I commend their work, which next year will recognize the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Pennsylvania Labor History Society. So they've been doing this work for 50 years. Today our topic of discussion is Eastern Europeans and Pennsylvania labor. And I'm going to talk briefly about two things. First, about a subject with which I'm most familiar, and that's Ukrainians in the anthracite region. And secondly, I'm going to talk about a subject that's in the paper and on the news every day. That's Ukraine. And its impact historically, what historical trends there have been that can translate into what's happening in Ukraine today. It's very hard to find an exact estimate on the number of Ukrainians, my heritage, who came to the anthracite region. About 1902 to 1922 are 18,500 throughout the entire anthracite region. Most of those came from western Ukraine, from an area that's known as Transcarpathia, the Carpathian Mountains, an area that was also controlled by the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was ethnically Ukrainian, but many of the immigrants who came to this country from there, when you look at their registers on Ellis Island, they registered as Austrian or Hungarian because they were part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, when in reality, ethnically, they were Ukrainian. That includes my grandfather, who came from Transcarpathia, the Carpathian Mountains, and who worked in an anthracite coal mine for 30 years. Eventually developed what they called miner's asthma, which would be officially recognized in 1969 by the National Coal Mine Health and Safety Act as black lung. He died from that in 1954. The vast majority of Ukrainians who came to the anthracite region worked as laborers. They were laborers in and around the coal mines. A small percentage, about 9%, as best we can tell, when I say we, I mean my brother and I, based on research that we've done, about 9% became certified coal miners, which, as Nick probably knows, was a real distinction. That was a real leg up to be a certified coal miner. And both of my grandfathers, my other grandfather was Sicilian, they were both certified coal miners. So they were in that small 9% that actually became certified to be a skilled coal miner. The Ukrainian diaspora, Ukrainian life centered around several important things. Ukrainian fraternal societies, very much like the Slovak fraternal society that we are in today. It was a social club. It was a place where you could get insurance for things like workplace injuries or life insurance. And life also centered around the church. There were two branches of the Ukrainian church, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. Greek because it started in Greece, but was Catholic and was aligned with the Pope in Rome. So there were two types of Ukrainian churches, Orthodox and Greek Catholic. I happen to be Greek Catholic. In recent times, very recent times, the Orthodox Church of Ukraine has split from the Orthodox Church of Russia. Now there are two Orthodox churches in that part of the world, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and the Russian Orthodox Church. So social life centered around the ethnic fraternal organizations, the churches, and family. And I can't tell you the number of times those Ukrainians knew how to have a good time. Because they sure did. Family, food, beer, music, storytelling, all of those things were very important parts of Ukrainian culture in the anthracite region, and I'm sure the same is true throughout the state, in Pittsburgh and other areas as well. I just happen to be more of an expert on anthracite. Younger generations like myself, we spread out, obviously. Mining was no longer an industry. Anthracite is all but dead. And people spread out all over the country for a variety of economic reasons, essentially. I, for example, moved to the Harrisburg area in the in the early 1980s for economic reasons, for job reasons, because in the anthracite region, and things haven't changed a whole lot, decent jobs are hard to come by. They just aren't there to a large extent. So that's a little bit about the Ukrainian diaspora. A guy by the name of Robert Magosky wrote a book called A History of Ukraine. 900 pages. I'm going to read the whole thing to you. So I hope you're patient. What time do we have till then?
Not much.
I'm going to read two very short excerpts, and then I'm going to give you a little quiz. So listen carefully. The first universal of the Ukrainian Central Rada, or Congress, to all Ukrainian people, whether residing in Ukraine or beyond its borders. Ukrainian people, a people of peasants, workers, toilers. By your will, you have entrusted the Ukrainian Central Congress to guard the rights and freedoms of the Ukrainian land. Your finest sons who represent villages, factories, military barracks, Ukrainian communities and associations have elected us, the Ukrainian Central Congress, and ordered us to stand firm in defense of your rights and freedoms. Let Ukraine be free. Let a national Ukrainian assembly elected by a universal, equal, direct, and secret ballot establish order and harmony in Ukraine. No one can know better what we need than us. No one can know better than our peasants how to manage their own land. Therefore, we wish that after all the lands throughout Russia held by the nobility, the state, the monasteries, and the Tsar have been confiscated and have become the property of all the people, After all of that, Ukrainian lands shall belong to Ukrainians. The Central Russian government has refused to return funds collected from our own land for the needs of our own people, for our schools, for our education, for our organizations. Hence, the Ukrainian people are forced to determine their own destiny. We cannot permit our land to fall into lawlessness and decline. That is why we, the Ukrainian Central Congress, issued this universal to our entire people and proclaimed from this day forth, we shall build our own life. In cities and areas where the Ukrainian population is intermixed with other nationalities, we propose that our citizens immediately come to an agreement and understanding with the democratic elements of these nationalities and jointly begin preparations for a new order. Ukrainian people, your fate lies in your own hands. In this difficult time of universal anarchy and ruin, prove by your unity and your statesmanship that you, a nation of workers and tillers of the soil, can proudly take your place beside any organized nation state as an equal among equals. Anybody want to guess what year that was written?
1800s.
2023.
1917. Vygotsky argues that there was two periods in Ukrainian history when they were truly free. The first was from 1917 till about 1922, when the Bolsheviks overran the country and it became the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. And the second was after, the second time they were truly a free country was after the fall of the Soviet Union in the late 80s, early 90s. That's the second time up until now that they were truly a free country. I've been in Ukraine several times. In 2015, they overthrew the pro-Russian president, Viktor Yanukovych, and he fled to Russia. The popular uprising overthrew him. And in Maidan, Maidan is the public square, a very large public square in the middle of Kiev. On the one side was a Stalin-esque built hotel, built during the Stalin era. They called them the wedding cake buildings. Looked like a wedding cake, you know? And on the other side, there was another building with a big banner erected by students of the university in Kiev that said, "Freedom is our religion." Freedom is our religion. That was in 1915. Now I'm going to bring you up to date. Again, this is very brief. A Declaration of Independence. Resolution of the Supreme Soviet of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic on the Declaration of the Independence of Ukraine. The Supreme Soviet of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic rules to declare Ukraine an independent, democratic state on September 24th, 1991. From the moment of the declaration of this independence, only the Constitution of Ukraine, its laws, resolutions of the government, and other legislative acts of the Republic are active on this territory. To hold on December 1, 1991, a Republican referendum on the confirmation of this Declaration of Independence, which passed by an overwhelming majority of 72% of the vote in Ukraine. Proceeding from the mortal danger that has threatened Ukraine from Russia, we believe in developing the centuries-old tradition of the Ukrainian state formation, proceeding from the right to self-determination envisioned by the United Nations Charter, acting in compliance with this declaration of state sovereignty and the independence of Ukraine and the formation of a sovereign Ukrainian state of Ukraine. The territory of Ukraine is integral and inviolable. From now on, only the Constitution and the laws of Ukraine are applicable on its territory. This act comes in force from the moment of its approval, the Supreme Soviet of Ukraine, August 24, 1991. No, 1991. 1991, yeah. So 1917, and 1991 are the dates to remember if you want to reflect on when Ukraine ever in its history, had independence, up to the recent Russian invasion. Okay, I'll close with this. I read in the paper yesterday that the president of Belarus, Lukashenko, I lived in Belarus for a while. I taught at the University of Belarus in Minsk. When I was there, Lukashenko was running for re-election. Him and Putin are like this. When I was there were student protests all over the place because Lukashenko, who was running against a female opponent who had to flee the country in exile because she was going to be arrested, Lukashenko won that election by 90% of the vote. Kind of hard to believe. Kind of hard to believe. Yesterday, Lukashenko said that should the Western nations, should NATO decide to invade Ukraine or Poland, he would station and use tactical nuclear weapons on the West. And I'll close with that.
I think it was said here about, a lot of people have talked about a pride in who you are. And in many ways, people from Eastern Europe, I remember I worked in Gary, Indiana. I worked in a small Catholic school, college, and I remember seeing the people from the occupied countries, as they would call them, and feeling the loss of culture of many people who came from the East. My experience with Eastern Europe is hitchhiking across Yugoslavia twice, through Poland, and several times, and going back to Poland with Nick and Melanie, visiting not museums and churches, but coal mines and steel mills. And I feel very, very deeply about the importance of this history. But I want to say something I think very important. Black history has become extremely well known. Eastern European history is where black history was in 1955. Black history became known to America through struggle. Struggle in the schools, struggle in the streets, struggle for the dignity of black people and their rights. Eastern Europe needs to be understood, and it needs to reclaim its history, which has been largely lost. One of the best, the most useful class I had at the University of Louvain in Belgium was Byzantine history. And this seems like a strange thing to say, but it gave me a background which I could go to Orthodox churches and understand the historical resonance of what was going on there. But I want to say Lou Martin is sitting back there, and Lou did something very important. He gave a program about 1968 in Westinghouse High School, where the black students walked out for what? For their history to be respected, for books on their history to be put in their library. There were none in a largely black school. They stood up, they got it, they got black teachers. They had, I think, only one black teacher at that time. They got black teachers, they eventually got a black principal, and they got black books, and they got black history. That's how people assert their history. The history we learned was all from Western Europe. If we learned much at all, we learned England, France, Italy, maybe some Northern Italy or whatever, but and a little bit about Spain and colonialization and all that. But we knew nothing about the East. And yet we look around. Pennsylvania especially, that's where the roots are and the complexities are. And it's a very complex and deep history with many, many layers and many mixtures. It's not simple to try to penetrate. I remember the greatest historian of Poland, a guy named Norman Davies, at least in the English language, wrote a couple of masterful major histories. And also he wrote a history of Europe, looking at Europe from the East rather than looking at it from the West, which is how we always have been taught it. And when they question the Polish people, when we would meet, they'd say, "You got to read Norman Davies." I say, "Oh yeah, I've been reading him, believe me." And they'd say, "It's amazing. Somebody who's an Englishman can understand us so well." And then they'd hesitate. And they'd say, "But he married a Polish woman." I married a Polish woman. And I certainly have a great deal of respect for the experience of the Eastern European peoples, whether it be in the coal mines, the steel mills, a great deal of the mechanics, machinists, etc. I had a PhD in philosophy. It took me 7.5 years. It took me 7.5 years to become a competent machinist and walk through the door of Union Switch and Signal and be able to cut steel to 0.002 of an inch. That is as equally requires intelligence and knowledge and skill and concentration as it does to sit in front of a room and bullshit about history or whatever. So I think what many people have said here is about the nobility, what John Brophy stood for, was the nobility of the knowledge of the hand, of the community, of the traditions, of the love of each other. That's the real history, and we all have it. And we really need to try to understand on a deeper level, I think, this big gap in our history, and it's based on class. The real prejudice against Eastern European history is that it's the working class, people who got their hands dirty. That's the prejudice that's at the root of it, and it's wrong. It's totally wrong. And so I'm so pleased to be here as a part of this program, to hear the wonderful talk on John Brophy and how he really believed in the nobility of labor, and the nobility of truth, the nobility of woman. That if this world is going any chance of being saved, it's because the women stand up and take more and more control. We're in trouble, folks. We're in trouble. And part of the way out of it, respect for women, respect for labor, respect for history. And I'd like Nick to talk a little bit about the book Hunky.
The book called Hunky is a story. It's a historic fiction. It's about two families that were born and raised for generations in the Carpathian Mountains of what today is Slovakia. One group moved to Pittsburgh and worked in the mills and lived in a small community down there right off the top of my head. I can't remember which. McKeesboard?
Yeah, McKees Rocks.
Oh, that's right. It was in the rocks.
Yep.
McKees Rocks, a place I really love. But the other family was in Somerset County mining coal. And it starts out in the Carpathian Mountains about how the one quote was in there, "I've lived in 5 countries and never moved from my home." Because everybody took over Slovakia and that central part of Europe at one time or another. I mean, it was Germans, it was the Austrian-Hungarians, and then it was Hungarians, and then it was the Russians and the Polish. Everybody took a crack at it. And the one thing that remained solid was the poor peasants that lived on the land that they didn't own and didn't control. And you wonder why a group of people, Ken said about 18,000 was it, or 180,000 people came into this country. From 1890, they estimate, until the end of the allotment of citizens from Central Europe come in, which was 1890 to the early 1920s, when they started shutting down the mines, and that they said, we're not having any more immigrants come in from Czechoslovakia or Slovakia or Austria-Hungary or Poland or anywhere else. And the story is unique because it talks about how poor they were. And I said today, I said, I walked in this hall and I could smell the cabbage cooking because that was the poor man's good vegetables because it grew big, it grew heavy in poor soil. And the soil in Czechoslovakia had been used for thousands of years on these small farms where the farmers had to give a percentage of their work, their product away to the owners of the land who went, and the owners of the commercial properties. So they knew what poverty was. When the coal companies threw them out in the streets and they had to live in tents, the Slovaks and the Hungarians and the Polish, they understood that. They also understood what oppression was and why it was so necessary to form union with brothers and sisters, to haul themselves through the catastrophic times of 1923. Think about it, 1923, everybody called it the Roaring Twenties. What the hell are we living through right now? 2023. Look what's happening in our world right now today. I mean, history repeats itself, ladies and gentlemen, it does. It's a sad thing, and the reason why it repeats itself is because we, workers, don't take advantage of the power we have. We need to start working in solidarity to make this a better nation and a better country. You wonder why. I didn't expect that. But you wonder why, what's going on. It's just crazy, but there is light. There is light out there. I did a little research through the 13th Congressional District the other day, looking at who was in the Democratic leadership of the political parties in the 13th Congressional District, because that's where my congressman is now, 13th District. It can change so many times. Sometimes I get confused because at one time, not too long ago, right across the street in my house, right across the highway, was in one congressional district, and on my side of the house, I was in another congressional district. But when they moved it around, the law said, the lawyers and the judges said, no, you're now in the 13th Congressional District. I took a look at it to see who is actually in control of the political parties. I'm really proud to say the vast majority of the Democratic leadership in the 13th Congressional District at this time is controlled by women. I love it. I mean, those are the people that should be in charge of the politics of this country. I mean, who knows more about controlling the almighty dollar? Who knows more about making food stretch? It's a really good book, and I want to thank everybody that came here today. But we have one other important piece of business today. We have people who we're going to honor today for their dedication and commitment to the labor movement, and we should get on with that process and let this old dumb coal miner kind of wallow back here in his chair and smile, because I'm glad you're here. Because I hope to God you've learned something here today. If not, a thing of education you got to learn and talk to the person that sits beside you at the table or across the table from you, and learn a little bit about their lives and their desires and hope for the future. This is, this is an open mic. So anybody that wants to come up here and talk, we have one.
I just want Charlie to hold up Millie's book and mention.
The Miners of Windber, I think most people here know of it, a very important book. We really want to honor Millie very much for what she did, and her health is very poor. She's really struggling, but she is here in spirit, and we're so happy that we have it being filmed so that she can see it. And I know she loved this town. Mine 40 was where her heart has always been, and she came back to this town from the south, and she wrote this book. It's an act of love. It's the story of the Miners of Windber. It can be got through Penn State Press.
And this is now also an open mic. Does anybody want to talk or any
questions? Real quick, I don't need an open mic. But you know James Michener, the author. He wrote the book Hawaii. He also wrote a book Poland.
Yes.
And it's about the history of Poland. It's a novel. It's not all history. But he was so taken with the country and with the people that he wrote a book Poland. And some of the central characters in the book are women.
Yeah.
There are 2 women that set out from Poland and came back with horses and things like that. They didn't get to keep all the horses, but it's a thick book, but it's a good read. And The Miners of Windber is a wonderful book.
Thank you.
There's also a book on Eastern European immigration to Johnstown. Eva Moroska wrote it, and she did her doctoral dissertation on it. And it's called For Bread with Butter. And it's really, and it hits all the Eastern European ethnicities.
Thank you.
Opportunity to learn from the history of what this has been shared today. In Johnstown, Pennsylvania, it's known as the poorest small city in Pennsylvania. The people are impoverished. And if we don't address the unmet needs of the impoverished, which were, we understand here now, the workers, and they were deliberately kept impoverished to feed a system that now we know is very sick. And in the book, a modern book called The Myth of Normal by Dr. Gabor Mate, he talks about this disease, and he says that sickness and illness is a normal response to disease. So when we look at how much sickness there is in our country, without looking at this disease that lacks morality, that lacks respect, that lacks responsibility, then it's no wonder that we're all using medications or drugs to cope with that disease. I'm involved with a project called Reimagine Cambria and Blair Counties, Visioning Sustainable Communities, underscored by public health, well-being, and safety. I think this is an opportunity to capitalize on the history of labor and capitalize the citizens that know better in the communities to work on resolving the underlying conditions of this disease. So if you go on the League of Women Voters website, you can read about this project, and I hope you will get involved by going to Fair Districts PA, the League of Women Voters, and looking into how you can help, because we want to live while we're doing these kind of things.
Okay, another book, I don't know if, I guess most of you probably heard of, is Patchtown 40, about the coal miner strike in 1923, written by Damian Dressick. I don't know if he was invited here today, but, well, okay, I did message him and let him know about it. I have my own book looking at Johnstown, PA by the numbers, and looking at the recent county health rankings that came out. I mean, Cambria is about 64th out of 67 counties. Okay, unfortunately, I don't remember off the top of my head where Somerset is, but still a lot of work to be done.
Thank you. Anybody else? Oh, all kinds of folks.
I just want to say one more thing. I don't think I need a mic. There's a war in Ukraine right now. I have to say something because half my family came from there. Probably not the same family as yours did. I'm the product of a German Lutheran and a Ukrainian Jew, so I really am crazy. But there is, in fact, a war going on in Ukraine now that is killing good people, and we have to learn to unite across all sorts of barriers we never thought were important before to protect them and therefore ourselves. My family left there in 1891 because of pogroms that happened there. And then I thought, oh, I must have a lot of second cousins in Ukraine. I hope they're okay. And then I realized Hitler probably killed them. Okay? So we need to cross barriers where we are, when we are, because shit's coming down, folks. We got to fight. Thank you.
Hey.
I do have a teacher voice, but I'll try this, and I'll try not to get emotional. I'm a retired teacher, and I think back to the things that I said in my classroom that I would get in trouble for today. And the books that I brought to the children, and the movies that I showed them. Just the other day, a movie that I showed to my kids about Ruby Bridges got pulled off because the people that are controlling the local schools, those of us who don't agree with them, have to get involved. I shudder to think what my colleagues are going through now, and who would decide to be a teacher in these days and times. It's not just in Florida, it's all over the United States. I mean, I taught labor history to 10-year-olds. There was a picture of children coal miners in the textbooks. Those aren't going to be there anymore unless those of us who can deal with the problems on the local level, because that's where the crap is happening. Thank you.
You're in a very historic town of labor history, and as Charlie said, Millie's book, The Miners of Windber, Our Struggle, we're commemorating the centennial of a horrific strike, 16 months from 1922 to 1923. And you get very caught up in of the emotion of it. Being evicted, living in tents. I was able to be at the Blair Mountain Commemoration and go into the museum in Matewan. Same situation all over Western Pennsylvania and West Virginia. We want to hold Millie up in prayer and pray for her recovery. And this book is available, as Charlie talked about, Penn State print on demand with a new ISBN number. And I want to also talk about, we commemorated this on the Labor Day of 1922 at Bantley Place, which is where these miners of the farm that they gathered for their organization were able to rent that space. We will also be gathering Labor Day of 2023, this Labor Day for the centennial, September 4th, if you're able to make it. And we will, as everyone has brought it, tell the story of the immigrant miner, our grandfathers, great-grandfathers, grandmothers, and their struggle. Thank you all for being here, and we will be at the marker, the historic marker soon. Another group of researchers, David Lauder and his daughter Anna Lauder, are putting together what's called the Windber Project. They have a Facebook page and a website, and they're working closely with Millie, but both David also has some conditions that he's overcoming, and his daughter Anna is carrying that on. So we would like to direct you to their sites as well.
Steffi Du might come up. My favorite steel worker. River ran red. The river ran red.
Well, I am here. Where's our, oh, we have her, good. We have Kip again.
Yeah.
Kip Dawson on
This
the...
is technology at its best.
So I'm here to introduce the winner, the recipient. We had a big lottery and she won. The recipient of the Mother Jones Award this year. And I just want to say that I got to know Kip Dawson when we were in Chatham College, it was Chatham College then, together I took a course, I was going to be an elementary school teacher. Of course, after the first course, I realized I couldn't work with the young kids like she could. But Kip and I were in class together, and we got to know each other. And she, in her 50s, got a teaching degree and did a whole career in teaching in public schools in Pittsburgh. But that career in the public schools in Pittsburgh was preceded by years of struggle and years of work for the movement, for working for justice. Well, she worked 13 years in the coal mines, but she, let's see, as, I don't think it has on here which coal mine she worked in. Do you know?
No, I don't. She was in Pittsburgh, down in the Pittsburgh area.
Oh, mine 84, says Charlie, and I think we'll hear from Kip about that in a minute. But among her notable, she's been an activist for much longer than most of us have thought about that. She's been building coalitions on the front lines of the civil rights movement, the Vietnam anti-war movement, the women's movement, the LGBTQIA+ movements, the labor movement, and educational justice movement. This is a woman who has really done the work of the movement over the course of her career, and she continues to be active. She's a voice for justice and a well-educated, loud, and important voice in our Pittsburgh movements for justice. She turned me on to, she showed me a website that has been, a Pitt student has been working on, that tells me things I had no idea that she was working on. She said had an astonishing career. She co-founded the first civil rights club at Berkeley High School in 1960, in solidarity with the student sit-in in the South. She co-organized the free speech movement at San Francisco State College. She organized and was arrested in 6 large-scale sit-ins, bringing an end to the all-white employment practices in San Francisco, led by the Ad Hoc Committee to End Discrimination, and served 29 days in jail. She co-founded the Vietnam Day Committee in Berkeley with Jerry Rubin and Abby Hoffman, started the Vietnam Day Committee at San Francisco State College. I mean, this does literally go on and on. But I think it's really important to understand that she's become for us someone who has crossed a number of lines, has worked tirelessly for justice in so many aspects of our community and our interests. So,
would you like to read that to her?
So here I want to present Kip from the Pennsylvania Labor History Society, the Mother Jones Award for Kip Dawson's effort as a union member, educator, and activist, promoting social justice, racial equality, and the rights of all working people. So Kip, here you are, girl. We have an opportunity to hear from Kip. You ready, Kip?
Yeah, I am as ready as I'll ever be. Thank you so very much, Steffi, for that presentation. This is a huge honor, but I have to say it's an honor that especially is coming home to me after listening to today's programs here. I have always said, and I will always say, that I have been very lucky to be picked up by the waves of history that we've been talking about here today and being a part of so many amazing things. But there's one thing that has come home to me amazingly strongly today, listening to you, and that is that my roots in this country, in the United States, are the same as those that you're talking about here, from Eastern Europe. Around the same time that we have been talking about today. My grandparents were Jews who fled to the United States right around the beginning of World War I in order to escape the pogroms and the drafting into the Tsarist army from Poland, where my grandparents are from. And they came here on time to be a part of the things that we are commemorating right now. The union organizing drives that were happening in Pennsylvania, they settled in Erie, my grandparents did. And they were buoyed by the Russian Revolution and the changes that were going on in Europe in a positive sense in their way. But my grandmother's husband was an organizer too. As Lou Martin's there, he can tell you more about this too. He helped me to learn more about this and looking into things. One of the things that my grandparents were very involved in was organizing solidarity with the United Mine Workers and the miners who were trying to organize not only in Pennsylvania, but including in Pennsylvania, the ones that we have been talking about and commemorating here. I don't know that my grandparents ever were in Windber, but they lived not that far away. And because of their activities and because my grandparents were socialists and because they were Jews and because the Ku Klux Klan and others were organizing against our people. He was assassinated in 1922 in Erie, Pennsylvania, because he was a part of the same things that you all are celebrating, and because he was a Jew, and because he was an immigrant. So it's what Steffi says is true. I have been extraordinarily lucky in my life to carry forward what my grandparents were working on, the solidarity among human beings that has taken the form of so many struggles, that some of which we have won and some of which we have lost, but in all of which we have been carrying these things forward. So I very humbly thank you all for this honor and accept it in the name of everybody that we have been talking about today and whose names we'll never know. All of those who have stood up together for women, for immigrants, for Black people, for Jews, for the Eastern European hunkies whose stories still have to be told, and I agree with Charlie McCollister and everybody on that too, for everything that this gathering here today is standing for, and for all the work of the Pennsylvania Labor History Society and all of those who are gathering our history, for my sister Lisa Parnell Christensen, who is being buried today too, for all of us as the struggle continues. I am overwhelmed and deeply grateful, and I hope that some of what I'm hoping to get across is here. This is a gesture of extraordinary solidarity, just as is the gathering that's happening here today and the one that will happen tomorrow. So with deepest gratitude, I am thanking you all. And thank you, Stephanie, for being such a good presenter.
I'm here, I'm very honored to present the John Brennan Award for Worker for Labor Education, and also the Erwin Marcus Award for Workers Education. I know those are kind of the same thing, but they are two distinct awards. John Brennan was one of the original founders of this organization, and I never met him, but Charlie tells me he was known for his big, flamboyant handlebar mustache and for his grand oratory style, which was especially appreciated in graveyards at memorial ceremonies.
The greatest graveyard speaker in labor history. He could make the stones weep.
There you go. I think Erwin would disagree with you, although you never heard him. I think he would say Paul Fuller was the greatest graveyard speaker, maybe the greatest funeral orator. Anyway, that's about all I know about John Brennan, but he worked tirelessly for this organization and for workers' rights and for in education. Erwin Marcus is my late husband, who was, by the way, I had enough sense to marry a Polish man, right? Polish Jew, and whose family came to this country by a very interesting story, which I'm not going to tell you. But he was an amazing educator. He overcame really a lot of his own issues. I think today he would be considered on the spectrum. He was definitely on the spectrum, there's no doubt about that. And so he did his own thing, but it was in a day and time where you could do your own thing. And when he was in high school, if he got bored in a class and he just thought it was pointless, he would just get up and walk out and leave the school and go to the library and get a book and start reading. And I've got books at home. He outlined every biography in the Allentown Library. Went to college, was able to get through, not with a great GPA, went on, got a PhD at Lehigh, finally was, settled into the one thing he really was interested in. And his degree actually was in, his first degree was from Penn State in economics, and his second degree was also in economics and kind of labor. I'm not really sure what it was in. economic history, the history of economic thought. And so he came to IUP in 1965 and taught there for 37 years and retired in 2002. He was always interested in the underdog. He did all kinds of amazing research. He taught the first labor history class at IUP. He taught the first African American history class at IUP. He encouraged one of his colleagues and helped her develop the first women's history class at IUP. And he used to talk about how the most rewarding thing about his teaching was to see the children of coal miners and grandchildren of coal miners who would start out in labor history classes with their heads kind of bowed, sit up straighter, and by the end of the semester be incredibly proud of their heritage. And so he worked, so tirelessly for public education, for public recognition of workers' activities and of their accomplishments, and never ever gave up. He had a very distinctive style of teaching. Everything was in threes. And people would say, oh, I just gave the best Irwin-esque speech because it would have 3 parts. And, but anyway, so I'm very happy to award this to John Lepley, who actually was Irwin's absolute favorite student ever. I have to say, I had a student at the time who was working on a senior thesis with me, and John was working with Irwin. And in one single day, it was in the summer, my student called me on the phone and said, I have spent 2 hours in the library today reading microfilm newspapers, and I didn't find a thing. I think I need a new topic. And I thought, maybe you need a new career. Then John came through to see Irwin, and after John left, Irwin said, I have a rule of thumb that when I'm working with a student, if they're doing their research within 6 months, they should know more than I do about the topic. I've been working with John for 2 months. He knows more than I do about the topic. And I said, you want to trade students? And he said, no. So he's always very proud of you, John. He would be so proud of what you've done. John has been 13 years with the steel workers in their education department doing labor education. He doesn't have Kip's long track record, but he's just getting started. He's just a baby boy. And he's coming along. But I'm so pleased to be able to give him this award today. All right, can I just read this?
I just wanted to add, he was the best grad student I ever had.
What did you say?
Best grad student I ever had.
There you go.
Best grad.
My husband had Parkinson's, and he was very sick for many years before he died. And this young man came to visit him all the time. And as busy as he was, and with his 2 young children, and Gus and Lincoln, I hope you are so proud of your dad. You should be very, very proud of him. He's a good role model for all of us, and especially for you boys. All right, I'll read this. When dreams may grow as young vines planted in the spring, their roots thrust down in deepest soil of truth, till workers all the fruits of understanding bring, born from our borders in the hands of youth. This is Hilda Smith, founding mother of workers' education. It says, freedom doesn't come like a bird on the wing. You've got to work for it, fight for it, day and night for it. And every generation has got to win it again. Pass it on to your children, brother. Pass it on to your children, sister. That's a song from the film The Inheritance. So this award is for outstanding efforts for education and training for union members at the United Steelworkers and promoting our rich labor history. Congratulations.
So I learned something earlier that I actually have a lot in common with Nick Molnar, and it's not height. Elizabeth talked about Nanny Glow earlier, and that's where my grandfather was born in 1926. The 2004 historical marker dedication in Rossiter, my great-grandmother was born there in 1908, so we share Chautauquas in our bloodstream.
Chautauquas.
He played Windber in football.
Yeah, and excuse me, father and sons, plug your ears. I got my ass kicked by them. So it's nice to be here under much nicer circumstances. So there's 3 people in this room who've played a huge role in the path I took. Elizabeth Ricketts, she was the first history professor I had at IUP. Way back when, and Charlie McAllister, and definitely Erwin Marcus. Just show of hands, how many of you knew Erwin? Yeah, so look, Erwin was, all the things Elizabeth said. He was an incredible historian. There are books published today, and you will see them cite his doctoral dissertation, which was unpublished, on the Knights of Labor. There's a new book out about the Wobbly organizer Ben Fletcher. There's an article cited in there that Erwin wrote in the 70s. And there's another recent biography of the Afro-Caribbean intellectual Hubert Harrison, and Erwin wrote an article on him in the early 70s. I mean, no pun intended, but as a historian, he was ahead of his time. But I think if everyone who raised your hands, you probably didn't know Erwin so much as a historian, but as a teacher. And he was the best. He was approachable, he was funny, he was informative, and I think at a place like IUP where the students are often first-generation college students wondering, do I belong here? A teacher like Erwin, Elizabeth, and Charlie can make all the difference. And I hope I'm doing that with the steelworkers. So I'm grateful to this organization. Erwin, as always, will be in my heart, and have a good day, everyone.
Is a friend of mine, so I get to in a way kind of roast her and congratulate her and honor her at the same time. 1977 was the Johnstown flood.
Yeah, moved
I was on July 19th, so I know it was in the fall of 1997 because that's when Miners for Jobs was formed.
Okay.
Yeah.
77. No,
Yeah, 77.
No, we didn't move to Cambria County until 78.
And the reason why I bring that up, and I'm not going to stand here and argue with them, my wife said I should be careful what I say about Amy, but I can always say the truth, so.
Please don't.
Well, I mentioned it, the Johnstown flood. 84 people were killed, hundreds of businesses were destroyed, coal mines and steel mills were flooded, mining and steel companies were making decisions that were going to have even worse long-term, long-range devastation and heartbreak on the surrounding communities. This building here we're in right now, there was 3 feet of water on the first floor of this building. So we're under 12 feet of water right here, right now. Amy, the one thing we did form out of that group, and it was a kind of a radical group, out of all that mud and slop and debris, there was a group called Miners for Jobs. And that's where I first met Amy, as I said. We fought, we begged, everything we could think of to try to save our communities and our jobs. I mean, it was devastating here. She was one hell of a hard worker. She was brash. She was opinionated and deeply cared about people. She organized a group of women and men to form Miners Community Food Pantries. She and her organization established food pantries throughout not only Cambria County and Somerset counties, but also the surrounding areas. and served all dislocated workers. These food pantries not only provided supplementary food, they provided a network of communications that brought people together in solidarity during one of the worst times of their lives. Amy moved on with her life in 1984 and went to work for the Communication Workers of America, organizing Ohio State workers. In 1986, she moved on to work for the Service Employees Union, 1199P, servicing nursing homes. In 1987, she went to work on a job search program where she designed, wrote, obtained funding for dislocated workers and helped write resumes, did job searches, and more importantly, explained to workers that being laid off was not their fault nor their unions. In 1989 through 1997, she went to work for the Service Employees International Union, at this time with local union 668 as a business agent, organizer of state, county, and nursing home workers. She transferred to the Service Employees International Union 595 as an organizing director for public workers, janitors, and healthcare workers. In 2002 through 2013, she went to work for the AFL-CIO Organizing Institute in Washington, D.C., mostly doing recruit assessment and training of organizers nationwide for all industries. John Lepley was a product of that program too. And I'm proud to say that both of them are from Somerset County and live in Somerset County, not from, but live in Somerset County. Amy supposedly retired. She is active in the Northern Somerset County Women's Democratic Club, has organized local community citizens groups to protect the local environment from an overzealous coal stripping company and cost them a lot of money. And indeed, it is a great pleasure and with honor in presenting her the William Silvis Award to this hard-working, brash, opinionated unionist. The William Silvis Award, Pennsylvania Labor History Society, the William Silvis President of the Molders Union and National Labor Union, was the champion of the unity and solidarity of all workers regardless of race or gender. Presented to Amy Niehaus.
It's on, can you hear me? I'll make it real quick. I want to thank everybody I've ever worked for, especially Rosemary. But I would also like to thank all of the workers that I've ever talked to, because you learn something from every one. Union organizing is not magic. It's a lot of listening. It's not sales pitch. You listen, you understand what people's lives are like, you help them understand how they can change that. So if there's anybody here, I have all this wonderful training that people gave me. If you know anybody who wants to talk about organizing a union where they are, I'd be more than happy to have coffee with them and hook them up with somebody who's still working. Okay. And as far as the strip mine goes, how many of you have ever heard of Clear Shade Creek? Okay. Beautiful, pristine wild trout stream. How many of you have ever heard of Spruce Run? Also a naturally reproducing wild trout stream that goes through my backyard. Today's the first day of trout and I'm not out there, so, but I just had a conference call with DEP trying to protect the headwaters of Spruce Run. It goes through my property, that's what he was referring to. Actually, God has a sense of humor, and she is funny, because I was fighting to protect the creek at the bottom of Hill 34. It turns out when they got over to that side of the hill, there wasn't as much coal as they thought there was going to be. We wound up saving them money. Oh, well. Thank you very much, but mostly I want to thank all the people I've had the pleasure and the honor to work with, rank and file workers, everything from physicists at Berkeley to nursing home workers. All have a lot in common. And I don't know that our new generation is ready to pull them together yet, so we better get busy. Thank you.
You go to the marker up here in the center of town. If you go out this street here and make a left, you'll end up right in front of it. It's only a block and a half away.
I am a union miner, and I'll work all night and day. I am a union miner, and I'll mine your coal for a union wage. In 17, I left my home for this country's flag. I fought the war. By 21 in my hometown, hey, I weren't welcome in the Legion Hall no more, because I am a union miner, and I'll mine your coal for a union wage. And for that wage, I'll lay my life when I march down from Marmet, armed with my Colt and Winchester, a red bandana tied about my neck. I am a union miner.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'll see you all, or most all of you, tomorrow in Lilly, Pennsylvania, where we'll be talking about the KKK and the repercussions of what's going on with that little issue in this neighborhood. And I hope Kip Sinatra is going to be able to be with us again tomorrow. All right. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Have a great day. I hope you all learned a little something. And I hope you have something to carry back home with you to share with your friends, family, and children.